Marvel, I went a little ahead in time by traveling. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 201 Pacific Rim. Inside the reassembler, all the Kree soldiers were subjected to the most rigorous inspection. Although George did not relax after learning that it was just an accident, it was not difficult to deal with this group of Kree soldiers. After modifying the memory in his mind, George also modified the flight records in the spacecraft. When the spacecraft returned to the other side through the wormhole, they no longer had the memory of encountering the super large spacecraft. For them, this was just an ordinary normal patrol. The difference was that the commander of the Kree Empire had been modified by George. In the future, as long as the Kree Empire made any action on this starfield, he would notify Wiki through a special communication channel as soon as possible. Moreover, in order to prevent the Supreme Wisdom from discovering all this part of the memory would be automatically deleted from his memory. Simply put, at least within 30 to 50 years, as long as George did not cause too much trouble in this starfield, the Kree Empire would not focus on this lawless planet. The Kree Empire, which owns the entire large Magellanic Cloud as its main territory, would take a long time even for a daily patrol. George was not afraid of going to war with the Kree Empire directly. With the power gem in hand, the Kree Empire had no way to resist his military force. Even the god of the Kree Empire, the Supreme Wisdom, is just a more advanced intelligent life in George's eyes and can't escape his means at all. But George thinks it's completely unnecessary. Just like the current Earth, if he wants, he can completely dominate. But George didn't do that, right? The main reason is that he pursues different things. George is now pursuing a truly transcendent opportunity. He doesn't even care about his own company now. So what if he occupies the Kree Empire? Will he become a good emperor who handles government affairs every day? Have you seen any of the big guys in Eternity come out to manage the universe in person? After sending this Kree Empire spaceship over, George also arranged the detector at the other end of the wormhole. For a war, time difference and information gap are still very important. The last time he went to the Rise of the Planet of the Apes plane, he consumed the resources of the entire Planet of the Apes and only built a flagship spaceship, the Mantle of the World. In fact, there are several good blueprints in George's collection, and George also wants to find an opportunity to build it. For the time being, there is nothing special in the real world, and George just took advantage of this time to go to other planes to satisfy his hobby of stamp collecting. Plane, Pacific Rim. Introduction. In the Triassic period, on an unknown planet, the pioneer civilization first noticed the Earth. They were amazed at this planet that could give birth to life. Because the Earth's environment at that time was not suitable for the pioneers to survive, their plan to colonize the Earth on a large scale was temporarily shelved. Pioneers are an alien colony creature that is very advanced in biotechnology and energy technology, but their bodies are as fragile as humans and have poor adaptability. Pioneers are about 3 meters tall and can walk upright on 2 feet like humans. They have limbs and wing membranes attached. Perhaps they evolved from some flying creatures. Their social hierarchy is strict, and the highest decision-making body is the Opportunity, which is similar to the Senate. Generally, the higher the status of the pioneers, the larger and whiter the crown formed by their exoskeleton. But in the 20th century, with the destruction of the Earth's environment by humans, the Earth gradually became more and more like the environment of the pioneer planet. The pioneers began to restart their colonization plan to the Earth, but the rapid development of humans forced them to accelerate the process of invading the Earth. Since the pioneers have not yet fully adapted to the Earth's environment, a rash invasion would have unpredictable risks, so the team decided to send customized giant biological weapons to Earth to destroy large cities and hinder the development of human civilization. Later, these biological weapons were called Kaiju by humans. In June 2013, the pioneers created a breakthrough point connecting the two worlds in the Challenger Deep of the Mariana Trench. On August 10th of the same year, the first Kaiju was created and sent to Earth, landing in San Francisco on the west coast of the United States. The US military used airplanes tanks, and artillery, and eventually used tactical nuclear weapons. It took until the 6th day to hit it, but by then the enemy had advanced 35 miles, 3 cities were destroyed, and tens of thousands of lives were killed. After the incident, humans named the giant monster Kaiju, but the monster attacks that were originally thought to be over appeared one after another in various cities around the Pacific Rim. Humans, helpless, invented their own monsters, mech hunters, using giant mechanical soldiers to fight against the monster army. 2 operators with interconnected neural networks, floating neuron connections, in their brains synchronously operated the combat mechanical soldiers, and used instruments to detect the level and code of the monsters. Since the emergence of mech hunters, humans have begun to win, and even turned monster attacks into propaganda activities and rituals. But humans did not know that a more terrifying threat was coming, and the monster war began. On February 28, 2020, a level 3 monster codenamed Sicklehead appeared in the waters of Alaska. The Beckett brothers, Raleigh Beckett and Yancey Beckett, drove the Danger Ranger to fight the monster. In the battle, their brother Yancey unfortunately died. Raleigh drove the almost scrapped Danger Ranger alone to return. 5 years later, due to the continuous increase in the combat power of the monsters, PDCC decided to recall the 3rd generation Mecha Dangerous Wanderer and retrieved Raleigh Beckett, who had been missing for 5 years. Actually, he had gone with the engineering team that built the wall to defend against monsters to be the driver. After selection, Raleigh's new partner was Asako Mori. In the first synchronization test, Asako Mori's neural connection failed and almost destroyed the base. Then the 4th level monsters Tailed Rat and Horned Turtle landed in Hong Kong and fought fiercely with the Chinese Mecha Storm Red. The Russian Mecha Cherno Alpha was unfortunately sacrificed. The 5th generation Mecha Eureka Raider was paralyzed by the EMP attack. The Dangerous Wanderer temporarily attacked and defeated the invading monsters one by one. In this battle, all the mechas, except Eureka Raider and Dangerous Wanderer, were killed. After the Battle of Hong Kong, PPDC decided to immediately implement the Gap Destruction Operation Plan. In the deep sea, the Wanderer skillfully killed the 4th level monster Swift Dragon. The Eureka Raider blew himself up and died together with the 4th level monster Abomination, and seriously injured the 5th level monster Poison Woman. Finally, the Wanderer crossed the gap and successfully blew up the wormhole by self-destruction. But the world did not have peace. In 2035, 10 years after the end of the previous war, with the advancement of technology, mechas have been updated and replaced with more advanced functions and stronger combat effectiveness. But the alien pioneers are still ready to move on the Earth. When the underwater wormhole is opened again, the evolved monsters are larger and smarter. They seem to be brewing a more threatening conspiracy, and the Earth is once again in danger of being invaded by giant beasts. Faced with a shortage of mecha pilots, Jack and Knight, the former mecha pilot partners, joined forces again and had to take the risk to lead the mecha trainees who had never had actual combat experience to fight back and fight a fierce battle with the monsters to protect the last hope of mankind. Chapter 202 Blue Star, Hong Kong, Broken Sky Base. Broken Sky is built on the port, forming an arc with several other bases, and a wall is formed on the coast, guarding the deep land. The current time is 2030. At this time, China's 4th generation Red Storm has been successfully built for some years, and the 3rd generation Dangerous Wanderer assembled on Kodiak Island was also destroyed before. It was attacked by a 3rd level monster Sicklehead while performing a mission on the coast of Alaska, causing serious damage to the body and the death of a mecha pilot Yancey Beckett. Therefore, the 3rd generation Dangerous Wanderer is still staying in the Broken Dome. The maintenance matters were previously handled by Stek and later handed over to his adopted daughter Mori Mako. Although the maintenance has been completed now, a suitable driver has not been found, so it has been placed in the base. George certainly has no interest in these old mechas. However, these mechas also have their unique features, which are worth learning from George. George is a complete black household in this world, but this does not bother him. Just by moving his fingers, George arranged a real identity of a mixed race for himself, and no one could find any problems. Of course, George had to complete the whole act. In addition to identity information, some past experiences were also completed by him. Anyway, many people died in the monster invasion in previous years, and there was no way to verify it if he casually involved some of them. Having an identity is not enough. It is not easy to set up your own laboratory and mecha hangar. So today, he drove his Mercedes-Benz Vision GT to the door of Sure Industries. "Hello, sir, do you have an appointment?" asked the guard at the door. "Of course." George lowered the window and glanced at the guard, then said. The guard's eyes flashed red, and he immediately let him in and said, "Okay, sir, please come in." George smiled at the guard, stepped on the accelerator and drove the car directly to the office building. A few minutes later, on the top floor of Sure Industries, in the office of Spider-Gwen, the helmsman of Sure Industries, George and Spider-Gwen sat opposite each other. "Mr. George, right, why don't I remember that I had an appointment with you this afternoon? Now I can give you 1 minute to explain," Spider-Gwen said, sitting up straight. "I have a new idea for the nuclear power energy of the mecha. This is a miniaturized sample I made. You can send it to the laboratory for testing." George pretended to take out a miniaturized arc reactor from his pocket and put it on the desk between the two of them, then smiled and said, Spider-Gwen was able to become the helmsman of Sure Industries at such a young age. Obviously, she was not just a vase. In itself, George was able to pass so many levels and come to her. No matter what method he used, it only proved that George was not a simple person, so she was willing to spend some time listening to George's explanation. Spider-Gwen glanced at the circular reactor between the two of them, then directly connected the phone on the desk and said, "Come in." Then she saw a female secretary quickly walked in, and then said respectfully, "Boss, what do you want?" "Send this thing for testing, and then bring in 2 cups of coffee," Spider-Gwen ordered. "Okay, boss." The secretary replied immediately. An hour later, the female secretary knocked on the door and walked in with a thick stack of test reports and handed the documents to Spider-Gwen respectfully. After Spider-Gwen finished reading the documents in her hand, she looked up and said to the stranger opposite her, "Mr. George, what are your conditions for cooperation? Is it confirmed so quickly? You are worthy of being the helmsman of Sure Industries." George smiled and continued, "I'm very interested in the previous mecha, but I want to redesign a mecha powered by this new energy. This new energy can be regarded as an exchange, and I don't want to be disturbed by anyone. No problem, I can set up a separate laboratory and mecha room for Mr. George. As the chief designer of Sure Industries, no one will disturb your work. I can also give you the information of the mecha in exchange." Spider-Gwen agreed immediately. The next day, under the leadership of Spider-Gwen, George first visited the laboratory of Sure Industries. Since the end of the last war, Sure Industries has focused its research and development on the research and development of unmanned mechas. George not only saw the corpses of several large monsters here, but also saw Newt Gissel, whose thoughts had been infected by the pioneers. In the original story, Newt Gissel is a doctor from MIT. He likes to read comics, listen to rock music, and watch movies related to monsters. Because he likes monster movies and wants to know more about monsters, he joined the Hunter Academy. There he worked with Dr. Herman, who was mainly responsible for studying the origin and weaknesses of monsters. But when exchanging nerves with monsters, his brain was infected by the pioneer, and the 3 monsters summoned became powerful combined monsters. If Spider-Gwen hadn't shut down the drone at the last minute, the world might have ushered in another ending. So, that night, George appeared at Newt Gissel's house, and then saw the monster cerebellum that he had secretly hidden. Without Newt Gissel discovering it at all, George performed a small mental operation on him. Not only did he modify his memory to make him normal, but he also killed the monster's brain directly. Of course, George could have killed him directly, but George now tries not to use his abilities wantonly. For example, the deal with Spider-Gwen is the same. 10 days later, in the newly built mecha room, George began to work. The first is the construction of the new reactor, which is the key among the keys as the energy core. In the Marvel world, George has already obtained all the information about the reactor invented by Howard. Even the new element he left for Stark Jr. has already been obtained by George. So it is not too simple to copy a new reactor now. Of course, it is simple to say, but the manufacturing time is not short at all. It took 3 months to build a prototype. After the new reactor was built, it was directly classified as top secret. After consulting George's laboratory has been basically isolated from the outside world except for a small number of people who can come in, and there are several soldiers standing guard at the door in turn. Although he understands the impact of the new reactor, George still took it out, not for anything else, just for the shining stars on the red. Please vote for the monthly ticket, recommend, and collect. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 203 PS Armor. After the power system was solved, Shaolin also sent the technical data of 2 mechas according to the verbal agreement between the two at that time. Storm Red, the 4th generation mecha, China's Hunter Mecha Warrior, pure titanium core, no impurities, each muscle has 50 diesel engines, weighs 1,722 tons, and is 76 meters high. It mainly fights in the Bohemia battlefield, and was formed in Changsha City, JS Province. Lucky number 7. The Jija Mecha is the 5th Mecha Hunter of the Republic and the 7th Mecha Hunter in the eastern region of Asia. It belongs to the 2nd generation of mechas. This large mecha, which is more than 70 meters high and weighs nearly 2,000 tons, is very different from the mecha in George's hand that is less than 20 meters. Don't think that these two mechas are only different in height, but in fact, there is a very big difference between the two technically. To put it simply, it can be regarded as a multi-story building with 6 floors and a high-rise building with 18 floors and a 33-story building. They are different in terms of safety factor, house structure, construction standards, etc. The requirements for building mechas in this regard are even higher. In addition to the overall structure, there are also differences in driving technology. The mecha technology, provided by Shaolin, because there are too many signals and programs running inside the mecha, plus various calculations, transmitted to the brain through the brainwave sensor bridge. Even if it is streamlined, the operation of a mecha, that is more than 60 meters high and weighs up to 2,000 tons is not something that one person can bear. After a death incident, the remaining mechas are basically operated by 2 people, and in order to synchronize the brainwaves of the two, the brainwave sensor bridge device has been specially improved. In this way, the burden of mecha operation can be shared. The driver needs a high level of tacit understanding, so the selection of mecha drivers is also very difficult. To drive a mecha, not only strong brain nerves are required, but also 2 people need to resonate. Resonance can also be said to be a spiritual fit. Generally, the best ones are close brothers and sisters, fathers and sons, or couples. Therefore, mecha drivers are very rare in the global selection, and the unmanned mechas currently developed by Shaw Industries are also solving this problem from another perspective. In fact, George can completely help Shaw Industries design an artificial intelligence to be responsible for the driving of unmanned mechas. But George didn't do that. The principle of gratitude is the same everywhere. If there is a rift due to the ownership of artificial intelligence, it will not be what George wants to see. The driving technology that George is about to develop is a human-machine integration technology based on the consciousness, control of the super armor in Starship Troopers combined with artificial intelligence controlled technology. The driving technology developed by George is actually completely to satisfy his own bad taste, because he himself has no need for this technology. Not to mention that those monsters are not taken seriously by him at all. Even when driving a mecha, he only needs to activate the black pupil control puppet mechanism ability obtained from the Naruto plane to exert the maximum combat power of the mecha. But as I said, mecha is the romance of men. If there is a chance, George will not miss this opportunity. Next, at George's request, a large number of materials were transported to the mecha room. Looking at the materials and instruments being transported to the room, George nodded with satisfaction. A year later, a military district leader looked at the closed gate and said to Shaolin next to him, "Miss Shao, I wonder what kind of technology the PS armor mentioned on the phone is? I'm very sorry, Commander Lee, this is the first time I've seen Kyo's technology. I just asked you to come here according to his wishes." But since Cairo invited you here, he must not hide anything. Shaolin replied. Yes, then we should wait. Commander Lee nodded. Because George's identity information only wrote George, and he was obviously a mixed race. After getting familiar with him, everyone around him called George Cairo, and George did not correct this. Just as they finished speaking, the huge electric door opened from the inside. George stood at the door and said to everyone, "Sorry, everyone. I was calculating a set of data just now and forgot the time. Please come in. Now I will introduce a new technology to you, PS Armor. PS Armor, the full name is Phase Shift Armor. This armor has almost invincible defense against live ammunition weapons, making the weapons equipped with it extremely combat effective, and this is a superb nanotechnology." With George's introduction, everyone also had a comprehensive understanding of PS Armor. It can be said that this is another epoch-making invention that George has brought out after the new reactor. As a controlled nuclear fusion energy source, the significance brought by the new reactor is unimaginable to ordinary people. As a clean energy, the value it can create is no longer comparable to that of Shaw Industries. Now George has directly brought out this weapon technology again. Chief Lee, who understands the significance of it, has once again raised George's personal value to a higher level. "Mr. George, are you also going to contribute the technology you just mentioned?" Chief Lee said uncertainly. "Of course, for me, this is just a technology. If I can help you, I will be very happy," George said with a smile. In fact, the armor technology George took out was just one of the technologies carried on his mecha. As the armor of the entire mecha, this cannot be concealed at all, so it is better to hand it over openly and make some contributions to the country in this plane. Okay, here are all the technologies about PS Armor. I will hand it over to you. As for how to use it, I will not participate. George handed Chief Lee a USB flash drive and said, "Don't worry, we will definitely." Chief Lee immediately promised. "Cairo, what do you need?" Shaolin, as a businessman, asked immediately. "My needs have been submitted through the experimental application. There is nothing else." "Okay, I still have experiments to do, so I won't keep you for long," George said. "Thank you for Mr. Cairo's contribution. If you have any needs, you can contact me directly, or you can pass it to me through Miss Shao. We will definitely meet your needs." After Chief Lee finished speaking, he immediately arranged for someone to leave here with the USB flash drive. After Commander Deng Li walked away, Shaolin said, "Cairo, as a businessman, you are very unqualified." "So I'm not a businessman, am I?" George replied with a smile. "If you let me run it, you will get more." Shaolin looked directly at George and said, "A new reactor technology has been enough to keep you busy for a long time. Weapon systems like PS Armor are not suitable for Shaw Industries. Okay, I don't need these people in my laboratory anymore, so transfer them away. I also want to make my mecha," George said. "Okay, I look forward to the day when your mecha is built. There is one more chapter. Please vote for me, recommend me, and collect me." Chapter 204 Gundam. 4 years later, in 2035, in the 5th year after George brought out the new reactor technology, all bases also upgraded the mechas, giving them more advanced functions and stronger combat power. Since the wormhole was closed 10 years ago, and the war was won, most of the cities destroyed by monsters have been rebuilt, and the whole world is recuperating. In the past few years, Shaw Industries has attracted many talents thanks to the new reactor technology, and the unmanned mecha project promoted by Shaolin has also made relatively gratifying progress. However, the mecha hangar that Shaolin gave hope to, the George who brought new opportunities to Shaw Industries, has not given any new technology in the past few years. Although this made her very disappointed, it was understandable, knowing that the two technologies George gave were already epoch-making inventions. So even in the previous few years, Shaw Industries invested nearly 5 billion in George's mecha room, and Shaolin also supported it. Room 1 in Shaw Industrial Park has long been listed as a forbidden area, and no one is allowed to enter. There were naturally voices of opposition within the Shaw group, as well as speculation, doubts, and more curiosity. But in the past 4 years, the legendary Mr. George has not released any new technology. Of course, outside Hangar 1, People can occasionally meet the handsome Joe. Facing everyone's curiosity, he always smiles mysteriously. Until a week ago, George, who rarely appears once a week, appeared in the public cafeteria for several consecutive days, which attracted a lot of attention. George, who was eating, heard someone calling him. He looked up and saw Shaolin standing in front of the dining table. "Are you here for lunch too, Miss Shao?" George put down his cutlery and asked with a smile. "No, it's just that I heard that you have been here recently. Out of curiosity, I came to see if there is any new progress in your mecha." Shaolin asked directly. "Yes, the freedom is considered to be initially completed." George did not deliberately conceal it, but answered directly. "I don't know if I have a chance to visit your mecha." Shaolin asked curiously. "Of course, I can do it now." George wiped the corners of his mouth with a napkin and stood up to invite. "You just came back from outside?" George said as he walked. "Yes, I attended the Pacific Rim Joint Military Defense Forces Committee Summit today. The committee has agreed to fully deploy my unmanned mecha plan," Shaolin said proudly. "Oh, then congratulations," George said indifferently. "Why do you look like you don't think highly of this technology?" Shaolin asked, after seeing George's reaction. "It's not that I don't think highly of this technology, but I just said that your technology still has certain risks," George replied as he walked. "Oh, how do you say that?" Shaolin asked curiously. "I don't know who provided you with the control system," George asked, pretending to be ignorant. "It was provided by Anaheim," Shaolin said, before she could react. "How do you guarantee the security of the operating system provided to you by others?" George asked. "Also, I saw from the news that today's summit didn't seem to be peaceful." "What do you mean?" Shaolin asked, standing still. "I don't mean anything. People always have to rely on themselves." George walked forward directly after he finished speaking. Shaolin stood still for a long time without moving. The corpse of the monster was studied by humans for various purposes. According to some special functions, various parts of the monster are extremely popular on the black market. And Newt Gissel is not the only human who has made a neural connection with the monster's subbrain. Even if George cured Newt Gissel, Pioneer has found a new partner, Anaheim Company. Although George didn't know which one of the new traitors in Anaheim Company was, it didn't matter. He was not interested in finding him out and getting rid of him, and he believed that he would not hide forever. Just when George was about to walk to the door of the mecha hangar, Shaolin quickly caught up with him and said to George, "I will consider your suggestion." "That's good," George smiled and answered while opening the small door on the side. In fact, Shaw Industries' unmanned mecha is not the only backup plan of Pioneer. For example, the Furious Obsidian that appeared today has other people's memes in it. You have to know that a specially made mecha, like the Furious Obsidian, represents a large amount of capital investment, and the reason behind it cannot be explained by one or two laboratory leaders. But all this has nothing to do with George. All conspiracies and tricks are futile in the face of absolute strength. If it weren't for finding a worthy opponent for his mecha, George might have pulled out the person behind the scenes and dealt with him. Now, George doesn't mind playing with him. "Is this the mecha you have built in the past 4 years?" Shaolin asked, looking at the mecha in front of her. "Yes, I call it Freedom. Freedom mecha is 75 meters high and weighs 1,800 tons. It is equipped with a variety of advanced weapons and has powerful firepower. It is a heavy firepower artillery destroyer mecha. Power supply, 5 ultra-small nuclear fission reactors. Equipment and design features, relative transfer, PS, armor. The main weapon is 2 beam swords equipped on the hip side, which are handheld. Of course, there are definitely more than that. Since this mecha uses nanotechnology, it also has fixed weapons. 2 close-range defense machine guns fixed on the head, which can fire continuously. 2 plasma beam cannons equipped in the flying wings, which rotate to the top of the shoulders for use. 2 sailfish rail guns folded on both sides of the hips, and can be used when unfolded, and other equipment such as reflective shields. In addition, George also equipped this mecha with a meteor system, which can provide additional force support. "Can it still fly?" Shaolin asked, looking at the wings behind the mecha. Yes, I equipped this mecha with wings, which can support high altitude combat, so that it will not be helpless against some flying monsters. George introduced briefly. What are those golden patterns on the surface of the mecha? Are they beautiful? Sheolwen asked curiously again. Of course not, but this is a secret. I won't explain it for the time being. I will show it to you when I have the chance. I guarantee that you will be surprised. George said with a smile. Why can't you show it today? Sheolwen said. Oh, by the way, there's no driver assigned to your mecha yet. No need, I will drive this mecha myself. I've been waiting for it for a long time. George looked at the masterpiece in front of him with shining eyes. Chapter 205, Mecha Transformation. On the surface, George's mecha is not much different from other humanoid mechas except for the added flight function. In fact, how could a mecha that took George 4 years to build be so simple? This mecha, which looks exactly like the Strike Freedom Gundam, not only inherits the excellent performance of the Strike Freedom Gundam, but also has its own unique design. When Sheolwen saw that George didn't want to say more, she naturally wouldn't force him, so she immediately said, Joe, a mecha like this is not suitable for one person to drive, which would be very dangerous. And mecha driving requires strict training. I hope you can be cautious. It doesn't matter, believe me, no one can understand mechas better than me. George said seriously. How about this? There are simulation instruments in the training room. You can experience it on the simulator, and you will understand that mecha driving is not something that can be done by one person. I'm doing this for your own good. Sheolwen suggested. Okay, if you insist. George said with a smile. Okay, let's go. Sheolwen turned around and walked towards the laboratory. The mecha driving test device in the base is like a virtual helmet. After wearing it, it can simulate the burden of operating the mecha like the brainwave link bridge device of the mecha. Of course, it is the pressure after sharing. After George and his party arrived, they came to an empty test bench. In front of them was a huge computer screen, like playing a game. He picked up the helmet with various sensors in front of him and looked at it. Cairo, let's find a partner to test it together. Although this is a test machine, improper operation can also cause head problems. Sheolwen persuaded George again after seeing him pick up the helmet. No, just watch it. George said without waiting for Sheolwen to speak again. He put on the helmet and started the test. At the same time, the big screen in front of him also showed a monster with horns like a cow. With the successful brainwave connection of the helmet, the scenery in front of George also changed. A 3D phantom of monster appeared in front of him, and various data were displayed on it. There was no sense of oppression in his mind. George quickly became familiar with the operation of the mecha, and rushed towards the monster with his fist raised. 3 minutes later, George took off his helmet with a relaxed look, and the word victory appeared on the screen. The onlookers, including Sheolwen, looked at him blankly at this time. After coming down from the test bench, George went directly to the host terminal to take a look. Well, it's okay. Although there is a delay, it's not serious. George also knew that his test results shocked them, because normally, even 2 mecha pilots on duty would take 10 minutes to complete the kill on the test bench, and he solved the battle in just 3 minutes. The people around came back to their senses, looked at George with a complicated face, opened their mouths, but didn't know what to say. Joe, how did you do this? Sheolwen asked in surprise. Spiritual power, as long as the mental power is strong enough, even one person can easily control the mecha. George replied. After the two walked out of the laboratory, they chatted while walking, and the other entourage kept a distance with a discerning look. Oh, I see. Sheolwen nodded and said, well, in that case I won't arrange a partner for you, but I hope you can still take care of your body. After all, driving a mecha alone puts a lot of strain on your body. No problem, I build mechas just for personal interest, maybe I won't have a chance to do it. George smiled. Not bad. We have professional mecha pilots. But, Sheolwen hesitated. But what? George asked. As you said, if there are hidden dangers in unmanned mechas. Sheolwen frowned and said. This is also simple. George said. Oh, then tell me about it. Sheolwen asked with interest. Sheoldewen usually shows an unkind look, not only because of the reason of protecting herself, but more importantly, it comes from the crushing of intelligence, which is a kind of strong man's confidence. So in front of people who can really give her advice and whom she admires, she can also humbly accept the other party's opinions. Let's make a profit. The committee only requires the deployment of drones. It doesn't matter who provides them. Believe me, if you sell the drones to Anaheim directly and let them input the control program and then provide it to the committee, Anaheim will definitely not refuse. George suggested. Then we are just making wedding clothes for Anaheim, right? Sheoldewen said unwillingly. Yes, but this way, you will have no pressure. George said. Sheoldewen grabbed George's arm and asked seriously, Joe, tell me the truth. Is there something wrong with Anaheim? George patted Sheoldewen's hand and said, let me put it this way, your drones have good intentions, but there are too many loopholes. I have also seen your prototypes these days. To be honest, I can easily seize the control of the mecha. Have you ever thought about what this means? How could it be? Sheoldewen said in surprise. Yes, a company specializing in software. How could it make such a mistake and do it so covertly? Think about it. It's not simple. George said with a smile. Yes, thank you, Joe. I know what to do. Sheoldewen thought for a while, then made up her mind and said. Just think it through. The other party has not been exposed, and we have no evidence to prove that the other party has any conspiracy, so just pack it up and give it to them. As long as we have no problem with the procedure, even if something goes wrong, it has nothing to do with us. Yes. Sheoldewen nodded. Okay, go and get busy. I'll go back to the computer room. George waved his hand and said, well, when things are over, I'll treat you to dinner. Sheoldewen said. Okay, I'll definitely come back if there's a beautiful woman to meet me. Then the two separated at the fork in the road. George returned to the computer room and looked at the tall mecha with a satisfied smile. Freedom, shrink. As soon as George finished speaking, he saw the nearly 80-meter mecha, including the meteor system next to it, began to shrink in an instant, from the original 76 meters to 18.8 meters. Then George blew a dress lightly and saw the 18.8 meter sized assault mecha, like a liquid, directly along George's arm, gradually covering his entire body. After the possession was completed, a slender red and black humanoid mecha appeared in the scene. It was much shorter than before, only 2.5 meters high. The appearance was also streamlined, and the golden magic lines appeared on the surface of the mecha like a tattoo. There were two triangular rear guards on both sides of the head pointing diagonally to the sky. The face had no mouth or nose, and was covered by a whole surface of golden energy. A golden cosmic energy caution on the chest, and as George wished, 6 pairs of energy wings slowly retracted into the magic lines on the back. Or 3-meter long Fang Shanhua with a gun blade made of energy stood next to the mecha. George picked up the Fang Shanhua next to him and brushed a gunflower and then disappeared with the flash of the magic rune on the palm of his hand. There is one more chapter. Please vote for the monthly ticket. Please recommend and please collect it. Chapter 206 Incident. George, wearing a black and red mecha, stood in the middle of the hangar. He looked at the metal palm in front of his eyes, clenched it, and then moved his hands, and a line of energy appeared between his hands. As his hands moved again, a huge energy shield appeared in front of George. After experimenting, George took back the energy shield in his hand, and then suddenly swung his arms to both sides, accompanied by 2 scarlet energy chains, the scarlet chains of Satorak. The swinging of the 2 chains caused a burst of breaking sounds in the air. Then as the scarlet chains were attracted, George took a step and appeared on the other side of the hangar and returned to his original position in the next moment. Then, in George's satisfied eyes, the armor on his body quickly hit his right hand like water, and then his right hand formed a glove wrapped around his forearm again. The special thing is that there are 6 holes on the back of the glove, but at this time they are all empty. The mecha built by George not only added magic runes, but also Pime particles and nanotechnology. Its simplest form is a pair of gloves that can store infinite gems, and then the traceless stretch spell is set on the surface of the infinite gloves. Then the second form is in a no armor form. George imitated the appearance of the entire armor from Lu Bu's Doomsday Mecha in a mobile game he played in his previous life. The difference is that George replaced the 2 energy decorations on his head with energy wings behind him. Of course, these 6 pairs of energy wings also have their own functions, but because the space in the hangar is too small, it is inconvenient to display them. The third form is the 18.8 meter mecha form. In this form, the space combat capability of the mecha is mainly highlighted. Various energy weapons and meteor systems can maximize the performance of the mecha. The last one is the 76 meter high mecha form. This form uses the amplification effect of pi particles and is a form prepared for large monsters. In order to maximize the role of magic and runes, George used Amazon metal obtained from the DC world for the entire mecha. Only this kind of metal can maximize the function of magic and runes, but the hardship in it is also something George did not expect. The most difficult part is to form the Amazon metal into nanometals without destroying the magic runes. For this item, George experimented for more than 3 months and consumed dozens of kilograms of Amazon metal before he finally completed it, thanks to George's molecular control ability. As for the color change on the mecha, this is the simplest application of nanotechnology. In fact, George also has a 76 meter large mecha made of titanium, provided by Shaw Industries, and a 2.5 meter close combat armor in his space. These 2 sets of armor are pre-made sample machines for the final product. Although these 2 sets of armor are far from the final version, their performance is no worse than that of large mechas manufactured by other bases, and they even have powerful power and attack power that other mechas do not have. George also specially made a space ring for the 76 meter mecha for portability and convenience. Of course, in his spare time, George also learned a lot of string resonance theory from the power gem. There is a saying that all roads lead to Rome, and this saying is the same in many aspects. A space ring can be created by magic spells, and a vacuum space can also be created by the resonance power of strings. Of course, the power of space can also be used to open up a space. Since this is the gift that George is going to leave to the world in the future, George has sorted it out. Although the conditions are very harsh and the materials are very scarce, a space ring can be successfully opened up under the existing technological conditions. This is also one of the results of George's continuous learning of the knowledge in the power gem during this period. Just as George was doing the final finishing work, Shaolin also made progress on the other side. On the afternoon of the day she returned, she contacted Anaheim Company and sold the supply contract on the grounds that the time given by the committee was too short. The original process of Shaw Industries was that Shaw Industries produced unmanned mechas and then transported them to Anaheim Company for control program and fusion, and then transported them back to Shaw Company for arming, and finally deployed them to the Pacific Rim base according to the requirements of the committee. It can also be seen from this how strict Anaheim Company is in controlling the control program. In fact, Shaw Industries only obtained an operating authority at the beginning and had no ownership at all. The gap here is also very huge. However, after George's suggestion, Shaolin finally chose the safest way. Although Anaheim did not agree with this plan at the beginning, after Shaolin made a huge concession, it was obviously unreasonable for Anaheim to disagree. After all, they are still in a military deployment alliance. Under the condition that Shaw Industries is both making concessions and saving time, Anaheim has no reason to refuse this method. Moreover, not all people in Anaheim are traitors. When other shareholders see that there is profit, they also strongly support this plan. So soon, the deployment method of unmanned mechas became that after Shaw Industries produced and armed unmanned mechas, Anaheim directly installed the control program and then deployed it at the Pacific Rim base. In this, Shaw Industries and Anaheim Company exchanged identities, and Shaw Industries became the OEM factory of unmanned mechas. Although other shareholders of Shaw Industries had great opinions, they could only temporarily stop under Shaolin's strong means. 3 days later, today is the day when the unmanned mechas are officially deployed. At Shaolin's invitation, George also came outside the base to watch the deployment of the drone mecha. In fact, Amara, a student, had already learned the secrets of the obsidian mecha. However, this time it was not Shaw Industries who did it, but Anaheim Company that was controlling the obsidian mecha. Mr. Kudo, how many drone mechas have you deployed here? Shaolin asked. Thanks to Shaw Industries, we deployed the Rakuka drone mecha here this time. In the control room of the data room of the base, the technicians from Anaheim Company were really preparing to connect the drone mecha. Everyone, we have delivered 100%. Everyone, the program is online. 100%. Well done. The company will not forget your contribution. A short man in a suit with round glasses said loudly with a tablet in his hand. Hey, for the company. At this moment, the drone mecha pilot suddenly said, the mecha is faulty, and the wireless communication connection with drone mecha 375 is suddenly interrupted. The operator also showed a painful look. What's going on? At this time, another operator howled in pain. There is a malfunction. These drone pilots are all operators in the base, belonging to the committee, and not the personal property of the company. The short person in charge who smelled like chicken shit also looked very nervous to outsiders, and the entire control room was in chaos. Chapter 207 Wormhole Opening. 6. It seems there are more than before. George whispered. What's wrong, Joe? Shaolin didn't hear what George said to himself. Nothing. Remember to take care of yourself later. George said. What happened? Shaolin asked. It started. George pointed to the 6 drones in the sky that were twitching. At this time, the alarm in the control room was also transmitted to General Kwan via radio. The drones outside have malfunctioned. We must stop sending them immediately. The 6 drones began to twitch continuously, and blue tissues like biological muscles began to extend from their joints, and then turned into mechanical creatures that were half mechanical and half monsters. Such obvious changes naturally attracted the attention of everyone on the ground. George, who was standing on the ground, could see through his supervision that the control part of the drone's head, which looked like a sea urchin, began to burst, and countless blue biological tissue spread to the entire body of the mecha. Enter the Wanderer. Go. General Kwan ordered the Wanderer mecha driver beside him. General Kwan turned around and asked Kudo from Anaheim, what's going on? I don't know either. I'll check it out now. Then he ran into the base. General Kwan immediately ordered through the radio on his body, all mecha pilots, drive the mechas to fight the enemy. At this moment, the 6 mechas that had not landed had completed their transformation and began to attack the transport plane that was carrying them. Immediately order all personnel to retreat to the base. George immediately suggested. You know, once the 6 mechas landed on the base square, it would definitely cause greater panic. At that time, even if rescue was timely, it would cause great casualties. All personnel immediately enter the base to hide. General Kwan also ordered immediately. After that, under the escort of the base security personnel, General Kwan and Shaolin also began to evacuate to the base. George stood there, looking at the chaotic square, and did not evacuate. However, not far from him, there was also a little girl who might have been frightened, so she also stood there stupidly. Joe Shaolin turned around and saw George, who did not move, and shouted loudly. After hearing this, George smiled and waved to Shaolin in the distance, signaling them to go first. The little girl was also awakened by the shouting and began to run towards the base. At this moment, 6 monster mechas had already fallen on the sea outside the base, setting off a wave of high waves. More than 20 transport planes also burst into dazzling sparks under the destruction of the monster mechas. This time, perhaps General Kwan's order was more timely. The moment everyone in the square received the order, they began to hide in the base. Although it looked quite flustered when the monster mechas stood on the square, they had basically hidden in the base. At this time, the mecha warriors in the base had already reacted. The Titan Savior mecha had already stood between the base and the monster, and fired several missiles at the monster mechas. As the saying goes, a hero cannot defeat 4 hands. Among them, the Titan Savior mecha, after knocking down a monster mecha, was also surrounded by other monster mechas. Then, under the huge force, the entire head cockpit was pulled off the body by the monster mecha and thrown to the ground. The 2 pilots inside also lost consciousness due to the impact and passed out. When the other mecha pilots were about to go to the mecha hangar, they found that the passage had been closed. General Kwan, who was heading to the command room, met General Lee head on. General Lee asked, "What happened? Are those mechas outside?" Attack. They are unmanned mechas deployed by Anaheim Company. General Kwan simply answered. A group of people continued to walk while talking. What are they going to do? I don't know. They are crazy. The mecha battle outside continued, and the monster mecha also launched several missiles, which accurately hit the right leg of another Titan Savior mecha. With a loud bang, the Titan Savior mecha fell to the square. Two monster mechas rode on the Titan Savior main mecha, and the energy beam on the chest directly penetrated the mecha, causing the Titan Savior to lose power. At the same time, the previously deployed drones began to gather in multiple areas around the Pacific Rim, using the energy beams on their chests to attack the weak points in the space on the seabed. As soon as General Lee and General Kwan walked into the command room with dust on their faces, they shouted to the liaison, "Prepare to close the gate. Where is my driver? Report the latest situation." Cracks appeared in many places. "It's those drones," the liaison reported. "All drivers, wormholes have been detected. Drones are opening wormholes. Multiple areas around the Pacific Rim are in emergency." General Kwan immediately reported to each base. At this time, in the square, after the two Titan Savior mechas won time for the base personnel to evacuate, they eventually lost their combat effectiveness due to the numerical advantage of the monster mechas. After the monster mechas stood up from the Titan Savior on the ground, 6 precision-guided missiles were instantly launched from the monster mecha's weapon compartment and flew straight to the command room and the base. At this time, the monster mechas naturally did not notice that there was a human standing in front of the base gate that was about to be closed. When everyone in the command room saw the missiles flying over and had given up hope of survival, a strange mecha with a height of 76 meters suddenly appeared at the gate of the base. 6 missiles hit the mecha, and dazzling sparks burst out. The smoke and dust caused by the explosion also obscured everyone's eyes. After the smoke and dust dissipated, George, who had taken the missile attack with the Strike Freedom mecha, stood in front of the gate of the base intact. You know, the phase transfer armor used by George has almost invincible defense against live ammunition weapons, and the intact surface of the mecha now proves this. Who is driving the mecha? General Kwan asked. The mecha designed and built by Cairo himself is called Freedom. Spider-Gwen, who had seen this mecha, introduced it. It turned out to be him. I didn't expect that he would drive a mecha in addition to doing research and development. General Kwan said. Yeah, I didn't expect it either, but he broke the base's kill time record. Spider-Gwen said, thinking of the test 2 days ago. Let's hope he can hold the base this time. General Kwan said, and then asked the liaison officer, why haven't our pilots arrived yet? Report to the commander, the passages to the mecha cockpit have been locked. The liaison officer replied. Someone is sabotaging it. General Lee said. There is one more chapter. Please vote, recommend, and collect. Chapter 208 Crisis. I'll help too. I can still help a little with the network problem. Spider-Gwen took the tablet on the table and said. At this time, outside the base, George controlled the Freedom and stood opposite the monster mecha, then reached out and took out 2 laser swords from both sides of his hips. George rushed out at the last moment when the smoke and dust caused by the explosion dissipated. He raised the laser sword in his hand and instantly slid past the 2 monster mechas opposite. When the Freedom stood with its back to the 2 mechas, the heads of the 2 monster mechas had fallen from their necks. Boom, with the sound of the 2 monster mechas falling to the ground, the other 4 monster mechas also surrounded them. Then more than a dozen missiles flew towards George. George did not take them hard this time. It was enough to test it once, and George was not used to being beaten all the time. A circle of defensive positions instantly enveloped George's mecha. The missile hit the protective circle and exploded, without causing any impact on the mecha. At this time, the 2 monster mechas wanted to repeat the same trick and jump onto George's mecha. But how could George do what it wanted? He took a step back and waved the laser swords in his hands quickly. The 2 monster mechas were dismembered by George in an instant. The last 2 monster mechas wanted to launch the energy weapons on their chests. George controlled the mecha to come to the middle of the 2 mechas. As the mechas rotated as a whole, like a silky walls, he sheathed his sword. Boom, X4, it happened in a flash, and the 4 monster mechas fell to the ground one after another. Oh, great. Beautiful. Victory. Then, a golden magic circle flashed under the feet of the huge mecha, and it disappeared on the spot. After George appeared again where the mecha stood, he was warmly welcomed by the staff in the base. Although they didn't know how the huge mecha suddenly appeared and disappeared, and many people didn't even know who George was, it didn't matter at the moment. They only knew that George stood up at the critical moment tonight and saved many lives. On the other side, although the two leaders were also happy to be able to save the base, there was something more important, which was to close the wormhole immediately. Is anyone there? A call came from the wireless pager. Gottlieb? Chief Kwan asked. Thank God, everyone is fine. Gottlieb said instantly. You're so good. Newt also said in the channel. Okay, stop the drones now. Chief Lee said immediately. No, it was an Ahim company's Riverside once. He was infected by the Pioneer. They have controlled his brain. Gottlieb explained immediately. Then is there any way to shut down all the drones now? Where is Kudo? Chief Kwan asked. They all ran away just now. Gottlieb replied immediately. I have entered the main program. Shaolin kept operating in front of the host in the command room, and then suddenly said, it wants to lock you out. The technician next to him said, feedback loop. Shaolin seemed to have thought of something and said happily. At the same time, in the weak points of various spaces around the Pacific Rim, large monsters have crawled out of the wormholes. In the command room of the base, Shaolin uploaded the feedback grenade to the main program of the monster mecha in reverse. At the moment, when the feedback grenade was successfully uploaded, a large amount of information rushed into the main program, instantly blasting the control core in the monster mecha. Dozens of monster mechas in various places around the Pacific Rim exploded at the same time. After losing control, the energy beams that were originally attacking the weak points in space were also deflected. Some monsters that had not yet crawled out of the wormhole were caught off guard by the sudden energy, and some even lost their lives accidentally. The wormhole that was originally opened was closed again. On the display panel of the base, all the opened wormholes turned green at this time. Lewin turned off the drone mecha. The technician said loudly, yes, the wormhole is closed. Gottlieb also saw the feedback on the computer in the control room, and then said, repeat, the wormhole has been closed. Before the cheers broke out in the command room, Shaolin looked at the energy display on the computer and her face suddenly became very ugly. What's wrong? Asked Chief Lee. 4 monsters have already crawled out. Shaolin replied, in South Korea, Russia, the East China Sea of the Republic, and Las Vegas in the United States. To level 4, to level 5. Gottlieb said in the communication. Level 5 monster. All those who noticed the news looked at the data sent from the computer solemnly. If this is true, it will be the first time that humans have encountered a level 5 monster so far. And there are 2 of them. According to the Sarazawa scale, the strength of monsters is divided into I to V levels. He believes that all the monsters that appeared before belong to our level. Received. All drivers will gather immediately. Chief Kwan said in a deep voice. We need all the help. Chief Lee said. Next, the base fell into rescue and rest, and the injured personnel in the chaos just now were quickly treated. The 4 Republic drivers were also carried out of the cab. Fortunately, they were only mentally injured, and would recover after a period of rest. In the Broken Dome base, the control center George, Shaolin, the 2 leaders, the mecha instructors, Newt and Gottlieb were all gathered. White Snake, Giant Lizard, Shrikethorn, and the big guy Thunder Monster. I just gave them these names. In the control center, Gottlieb used virtual projection technology to mark the monsters crawling out of the wormhole. Okay, the thorny one, the big one, and the big lizard are leaving the city and heading for the sea. What does this mean? Mecha pilot instructor Knight Lambert asked. Maybe they want to meet up with the White Snake in the East China Sea of the Republic. Shaolin guessed. Yes, I guess Ebian knows what they want to do at once. Newt said. But we have to ask first. Chief Lee said. Yes, we need to find them first. Chief Kwan looked at the projection and said. Are there any mechas closer to these monsters? Knight asked. The surviving mechas in Kindu and Saling base are trying their best to intercept them. Commander Kwan replied. I mean trying their best. I'm afraid we need to rely on ourselves. If it weren't for Cairo, we wouldn't be much better. Commander Lee glanced at George and said. I'm just doing my best. In fact, Miss Sheo has already guessed it very close. George said with a smile. Oh, what do you mean? Commander Kwan asked. Please collect, recommend, and vote for me. Chapter 209 Invasion. What if these monsters are not going to the East China Sea? George prompted. What do you mean? Sheolewin said. Please expand the map of the monsters in battle. Thank you. George said to the staff on the main console in the command room. Okay, the data has been put on the main screen. The staff replied. Then, a map of the Pacific Rim was projected on the main screen among the crowd. At the edge of the area, the monsters that had appeared before were also marked. What's going on? What else do you know? General Lee asked. When two armies are facing each other, we must understand the enemy's combat purpose, so that we can know how to resist the enemy's attack, disrupt the enemy's actions, and seize the initiative. George pointed to the monsters on the map and said, have you ever thought about what if the monsters are not blindly attacking our city? What if we just happen to block their way? George took the tablet from Sheolewin's hand, and then marked all the monsters' previous routes in red. Yes, it's here. George pointed to the intersection and said, Mount Fuji in Japan. Newt said, looking at the intersection. Speculate the routes of the White Snake, Giant Lizard, Shrike and Thunder Monster. General Kwan immediately said to the staff. Then the four monsters also appeared on the main screen. According to the route of action, their collective target is also Mount Fuji. Mount Fuji, but why? Sheolewin looked at the intersection of the two pictures and asked puzzledly. For air element. George replied. For air element, I know. Mount Fuji is a volcano containing a large amount of rare element, and the blood of monsters can react violently with them. My fuel thruster test is based on this. Dr. Gottlieb suddenly said excitedly. Gottlieb quickly came to the operating table with a cane, squeezed the staff aside, and said, excuse me. The staff looked at General Kwan, and then gave up the operating position at the general's nod. It doesn't sound good. Sheolewin said to the nervous Dr. Gottlieb. Gottlieb is a doctor from Germany, majoring in applied mathematics and engineering. In the monster science department, he was mainly responsible for predicting the frequency, number and precise time of monster attacks through mathematical research. During the 10 years, when the wormhole was closed, he began to study the various uses of monster blood, and discovered that monster blood would react violently with rare element. Not good, right? As a mecha instructor, Knight naturally didn't understand a lot of scientific knowledge. Very bad. Mount Fuji is an active volcano and a geological pressure point. Sheolewin explained. Based on the mass ratio that monster blood can reach, this reaction will cause an eruption event and ignite the Pacific Ring of Fire. Dr. Gottlieb, while quickly inputting a large number of formulas on the main screen console in the command room, explained to everyone, if billions of tons of toxic gases and ash are sprayed into the atmosphere, it will exterminate all life on Earth. As Dr. Gottlieb explained, a dynamic animation was projected on the main screen, which gave a dynamic demonstration of what he had just said. Even Knight and others who were new to technology understood the seriousness of the matter. Then helped the pioneers achieve the goal of transforming the Earth. Sheolewin also said the ultimate goal of the monsters at this time. Then we can't let them reach Mount Fuji. General Lee said decisively. I'll go ask them about the progress of the mecha repair. Knight said immediately. Even if we have 100 mechas, time waits for no one. Sheolewin pointed out the most lacking time problem now. After all, each mecha weighs about 2,000 tons, and it takes a lot of time to transport it to Jaya Benji. Drive Gottlieb, can your thrusters be used now? General Kwan asked. No, it's not ready yet. Dr. Gottlieb shook his head and replied. Where is the problem? I can help you check it out. George took the tablet from Gottlieb and said. Not bad. Sheolewin also said immediately. In theory, if, maybe, with your help. Gottlieb said uncertainly. Gottlieb, what does theoretically mean? General Lee asked. In theory, there are still a few difficulties that need to be calculated. Dr. Gottlieb was still thinking about what words to use to explain it more conveniently. I think this should be enough. George smiled and returned the tablet to Dr. Gottlieb. Gottlieb took the tablet immediately after hearing this, and then quickly verified the data changed by George. Then he excitedly said to General Kwan, "Yes, I think the thruster can be put into use today. Very good. All the materials in the base will be opened first, and you can raise any needs." General Kwan immediately promised, "Okay, as long as the materials are in place, I'm confident that we will be able to deliver our mecha before those monsters reach Mount Fuji." Dr. Gottlieb held up the tablet in his hand and promised. Then, everyone began to get busy. Gottlieb first made a list of the materials needed and sent it to General Kwan. General Kwan did not hesitate at all and immediately ordered his men to move all the materials. Knight also immediately asked the surviving mecha to cooperate in the mecha modification. During this period, Dr. Gottlieb also found George and said, "Thank you, Joe. I didn't expect that in addition to your research on new energy, you also know so much about power systems. Numbers don't lie. Numbers are the best way for humans to obtain God's instructions." George said with a smile, "Yes, that's right. I didn't expect you to think so, Joe. After this incident is over, I must have a good discussion with you," Gottlieb said excitedly. "Joe." A clear and pleasant female voice came at this time. Gottlieb looked behind George, then waved his hand, and finally smiled and teased, "I won't disturb you, Joe. We'll talk later." "No problem, Gottlieb, we'll talk later," George said with a smile. After Gottlieb left, George turned around and said to Shaolewen, who was approaching, "What's the matter, Miss Shao?" "Joe, we are very familiar with each other. I think you can call me Lewen." Shaolewen rolled her eyes at George and said, "Okay, Lewen, you are looking for me?" George continued to ask, "Can't I come to you if there is nothing?" Shaolewen said unhappily, "Of course not, but aren't you supposed to participate in the investigation of the unmanned mecha now?" George asked. "Cairo, speaking of this, I have to thank you. If you hadn't reminded us, our Shaw Industries might have been finished this time," Shaolewen said with lingering fear. Shaolewen's words are not false. This is the real world. It's not like in the movies, where such a huge accident was caused without any punishment. There is one more chapter. Please recommend, collect, and vote for me. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 210, Before the War. It's mainly because you made the right choice. I just provided you with a possibility, George said. But thank you anyway. Shaolewen walked up to George and hugged him, then said, "Okay, I received your thanks." George patted Shaolewen on the back gently. Shaolewen took 2 steps back and said to George, "Don't get me wrong, I'm just expressing my gratitude." "Okay, this is a hug of gratitude," George said with a smile. After that, the two smiled at each other and walked into the base together. "Joe, have you heard of the Wormhole Church?" Shaolewen asked as they walked. "No, you know, I basically stay in the computer room," George said. "This church is very popular abroad. The control in China is stricter, so there is no soil for it to spread." Shaolewen nodded and said, "You know the monster slums abroad, right? They are slums, built on the basis of the Monster Avengers. The earliest Wormhole Church is a religious organization derived from the monster community. They wear uniform clothes. They also believe that humans have seriously damaged the environment of the earth, and monsters are messengers sent by the universe. These members of the Wormhole Church have become worshippers of monsters. God is dissatisfied with what humans have done. Monsters are punishments. This is the declaration of their church." Shaolewen introduced contemptuously. "Are you saying that an Ahim company is related to this Wormhole Church?" George asked. "Yes, according to the investigation, many monsters' brains have been bought by an Ahim company at a high price. And before Newt and the monsters had synesthesia, they had tried to synesthesia with the monsters, but they all failed. According to Newt's narration, they had found Newt many times and hoped that he could join this church. But you know Newt is timid, so he refused," Shaolewen said with a smile. George also smiled in his heart. If he hadn't modified Newt's spirit when he first came, maybe this kid would have joined the Wormhole Church long ago. Now the committee has found that many of the senior executives of Anaheim are senior members of this church. They even suspect that they have found a way to communicate with monsters and have been controlled by the pioneers. Then what? Anaheim is completely finished. The committee is already investigating the company thoroughly, and the Wormhole Church has also been included in the list of illegal organizations. Sheol introduced. By the way, I plan to acquire Anaheim. After all, this company still has some good technology and researchers. I didn't expect you to be so fast. George sighed. There's no way. The loss this time is too great. All the countries around the Pacific Rim have suffered damage from drone mechas. Except for the Broken Dome base, other defense bases are basically paralyzed. Sheol sighed. It's hard to offend the public anger. George also sighed. Then why did you come to me? Like a piece of wood. General Lee asked me to come to you. He seems to be very interested in the technology in your mecha. Sheol said. I see. Although it doesn't mean much, it doesn't matter to give it to them. George nodded and said. In a small meeting room, George met General Lee, who had been waiting for a long time. Hello, Joe. I didn't expect that you gave us such a big surprise as soon as we met after such a long time. General Lee shook George's hand and said. No, today is also the first time to use it in actual combat. George said modestly. Everyone is very busy today, so I won't beat around the bush. I'm also entrusted by the higher-ups to ask, is there any special technology for your mecha to suddenly appear and disappear? Yes. George didn't intend to hide it, so he said it directly. George stretched out his right hand, revealing a ring on his little finger. Then he said, that's it. Ring? General Lee looked at Sheol in confusion, and seeing Sheol also had a puzzled expression on her face, they all looked at George again. This is not a different ring, this is a space ring. George explained with a smile. String theory in quantum mechanics, do you know? General Lee and Sheol nodded. This ring is made according to string theory. However, I won't explain the specific force theory too much. I put the manufacturing method and theory in this USB flash drive, which also contains some nanotechnology used by the mecha. George took out a USB flash drive from the ring and handed it to General Lee. General Lee took the USB flash drive and said, it doesn't matter. It's useless to me. I can give it to you, and it can be used in a place where it is needed. George waved his hand and said, Joe, are you interested in joining the Science and Technology Institute? After you submitted those 2 technologies last time, the Science and Technology Institute asked me to come and invite you to give lectures many times. General Lee asked. I don't have the ability to give lectures at the Science and Technology Institute. There are pillars of the country and my predecessors there. If there is a chance, I will go back and learn from them, but forget about joining the Science and Technology Institute. I can't stand those rules and regulations. George declined. No, Joe, your contribution is also very great, and we welcome you to join us. General Lee said. Thank you all for your kindness. Let's talk about it after this incident is over. George said. Okay, after this is over, Kyoto is going to award you a medal. We'll talk about it when we get to Kyoto. General Lee said with a smile. By the way, there's one more thing. What else is there? General Lee, please tell me. George said. Nothing. It's just this battle against the monsters. Joe, you don't have to participate. General Lee said. Oh, why is that? George asked. This time, they have invested a total of 5 mechas, which is completely enough from the perspective of strength comparison. So for safety reasons, I hope you can stay in the rear base, Joe. General Lee explained. George pretended to think for a while, then agreed. Okay, I'll follow the instructions of the leader. On the other side, with the concerted efforts of everyone in the base, 5 mechas, Saber Athena, Heroic Protector, Phoenix Gorilla, Wanderer and a Titan Savior can go out to fight the enemy. In the command room, except for the Mecha Instructor Knight, everyone else gathered here again. Command Center, we are ready to launch. Knight reported. Received, Avenger, ignite in 10 seconds. General Quan said. 10987. 1 ignite as the order was issued. The thrusters behind the 5 mechas emitted blue sparks together. In everyone's anxious mood, the mechas began to slowly rise into the air. There are 2 more chapters, and Pacific Rim ends. Please recommend, collect, and vote for me. Chapter 211 Giant Monster. George folded his arms, leaned against the wall at the door of the command room, looked at the excited people and the 5 mechas on the main screen and shook his head. Spider-Gwen, who had been paying attention to George, came over quietly and asked in a low voice, "What's wrong?" "Nothing. I just don't think this operation is good," George said directly. "What do you mean?" Spider-Gwen continued to ask. "Until now, Hebian and Kudo have not been found, which means that an Ahim company still has secrets that have not been dug out. If they jump out to make trouble at this time," George said. "What should I do?" "Then I will tell the generals now," Spider-Gwen said anxiously. "It's useless. There is no use, even if I say it without evidence. Besides, don't I still have me?" George said with a smile. "Yes, your Liberty can fly too. But, if you are alone, will it be dangerous?" Spider-Gwen asked with concern. "Don't worry, that's because you haven't seen the true strength of the Liberty. It's just a few monsters," George said easily. Spider-Gwen looked at George, who exuded confidence, and was stunned for a moment. "The Mech warriors have landed successfully," Knight reported in the communicator. "Very good, it's up to you guys next," General Kwan said. "Miss Shao?" Newt suddenly shouted when he appeared behind Spider-Gwen. "Ah, what?" Spider-Gwen came to her senses and asked. "Our automated factory in Tokyo sent out an energy signal," Newt said. "How could it be?" Spider-Gwen took the tablet handed over by Newt and checked it. "Hebian?" "What?" Newt didn't hear clearly. "Hebian and the others are in Tokyo. When we worked together before, I rented that factory to an Ahim company for use," Spider-Gwen said after reacting. Things really developed in the expected direction. After landing in Tokyo, the monster was heading towards Mount Fuji. Just in the process of moving forward, it caused countless casualties and property losses to the people of the Foot Basin. Ginza, originally a major commercial district in the central district of Tokyo, Japan, is famous for its high-end shopping stores. It is one of the representative areas of Tokyo, and also the largest and most prosperous street in Japan. At this time, it has become a ruin because 5 mechas have successfully blocked the monster's progress here. Although countless people and high-rise buildings were affected again during the battle, they could not care about that much now. The key was to stop the monster from causing the eruption of Mount Fuji as soon as possible. When the monster was about to lose under the attack of the 5 mecha warriors, the riverside of Anaheim Company activated the backup plan buried in Shore Industrial Automation Factory. A tearing worm made by combining cloned monster organs with unmanned mecha technology began to rush out of the factory quickly and then fuse the flesh and blood of 4 large monsters together to form a terrifying new super monster. The size of this monster is unique in terms of height and length. It not only has thick hind legs, 2 long snake-like flexible tails, but also 4 flexible arms and thick outer armor. After the monster appeared, George knew that it was time for him to play, and then quietly withdrew from the command room. Under the attack of the super monster, although the 5 mechas performed very well and worked hard, they still quickly lost personnel. The giant monster, that was 150 meters high, was not something they could fight against. In the short time that George went to the square, 4 of the 5 mechas had completely lost their combat effectiveness. The Avenger was also badly damaged, relying only on flexible evasive movements to delay time. If this situation continued, failure was only a matter of time. "Everyone, is there anything else that can support them?" General Kwan asked. "Yes," Spider-Gwen said. "Who?" "Look, he's ready." Spider-Gwen smiled and pointed to the mecha on the square with its thrusters already turned on. The huge mecha seemed to sense it and looked back at everyone in the command room. Then the thrusters of the special self-propulsion system glory transmitter were installed on the back, and blue flames were released instantly. The mecha went deep into the sky at an unimaginable speed. Oh! A cheer broke out in the command room. 2 minutes later, George had already arrived above Tokyo. At this time, the Avenger Wanderer had become 2 pieces paralyzed in the ruins of Ginza. This was the real world, and it was impossible for the ridiculous heroic plots in the movies to appear. Of course, it was impossible to be as strong as George. "Joe, can you hear me?" Spider-Gwen's voice came from the communication channel. Very clear. George replied. The monster is still 1 kilometer away from the top of Mount Fuji and is moving fast. We must not let the monster detonate Mount Fuji, Sheoldewan said. No problem, George said as he looked at the giant monster climbing towards the top of Mount Fuji in the distance. George took out 2 MAM-21KF Sirius multifunction combined high-energy beam rifles from both sides of the waist of the mecha, and then connected the 2 beam rifles front and back to form a long-range rifle. George raised the long-range rifle without even a decent aim and directly raised the rifle and pulled the trigger. A beam of energy instantly passed through a distance of 1000 meters and hit the hind legs of the giant monster. Although the 2 MAM-21KF Sirius multifunction combined high-energy beam rifles can also attack the giant monster, compared with the huge size of the monster, the wound is undoubtedly much smaller. So George specially combined it into a long-range rifle and only used 1 shot to break the giant monster's left leg. The heat energy carried by the energy beam left a large hole on the monster's left leg after being burned. Many half-mechanical and half-monster tearworms suddenly emerged from the giant monster and began to repair the scars left by the rifle. Although it was seriously injured, the monster still dragged its injured left leg to climb towards the top of Mount Fuji. The Freedom Mecha appeared opposite the giant monster, and the monster raised its 2 front paws and was about to claw at the Freedom. The Freedom also stretched out its hands and instantly grabbed the monster's claws firmly. The giant monster swung its 2 tails, and the 2 tails whipped at the Freedom like 2 flexible whips. George did not control the Freedom to take the attack head on, but at the moment when the 2 whips approached him, he controlled the Freedom to quickly shrink and then dodge through the gap between the 2 tails. After dodging, it immediately grew larger and immediately grabbed the monster's 2 tails with both hands, and the thrusters behind it pushed forward. The Liberty threw the beast to the ground like a shoulder throw. The beast roared in pain in an instant, and the trees on Mount Fuji were uprooted. The beast rolled out of George's hand, and then did not entangle with George, and continued to climb to the top of the mountain. There is one more chapter. Recommendation. Collection. Monthly ticket. You can arrange it as you like. Chapter 212 The Other Side of the Wormhole. George stood behind the giant monster, and pulled out 2 laser swords from the hips of the mecha. The giant monster was too big, and these 2 weapons would not cause much damage to the monster, so George set his sights on the long tail. George used the thrusters on his shoulders to slide quickly, and came to the side of the monster. The monster roared, and swung its long double tails again, and suddenly turned back, to use its terrifying giant mouth to seal the escape space of the Freedom. George swung the laser sword in his hand directly at the dancing long tail. The sword flashed, and the dozens of meters long double tails fell. Roar. The monster roared in pain. In George's continuous attack, the monster no longer dodged and directly used the thick exoskeleton armor to resist the damage, and then struggled to climb towards its target. Joe, stop it, it's too late. Sheoldewan's anxious reminder came again in the communication channel. Okay, that's it. George replied slowly. Although the laser sword is sharp, it is still too small to deal with a monster of this size. He put the 2 swords back into the scabbard, and as the rear wing of the Freedom fell off, he flew above the head of the giant beast. As the 6 beams were activated, the head of the giant beast was instantly cut into several pieces. Boom. The giant beast fell to the ground with a bang, and the snow on Mount Fuji also avalanched at this time, and the heavy snow poured down instantly. Ah. Oh. Haha. At this moment, countless people began to shout for victory. Only Koabe and Kudo were on the top of a building in Ginza, venting their anger in anger. No. Lost. Koabe knelt on the roof and said, "How can I lose? Impossible." Kudo stood on the edge of the building, looking at the giant beast falling in the distance, and roared, "Plan B. We still have Plan B." Koabe suddenly remembered something and said suddenly, "Yes, don't be too proud too early, we still have Plan B." Kudo also became excited. Kudo immediately started to operate on his tablet computer. As Kudo entered the verification code, the ground in a square in Tokyo suddenly opened. A missile flew straight into the sky. George had already noticed it when the missile was launched, but no one noticed the smile on George's lips. "Joe, hide quickly, there is an attack." The mecha pilots who were defeated before also noticed the missiles flying in the sky and immediately reminded them through the communication channel. George threw the body of the behemoth into the mirror space without panic, and then appeared in front of the other mecha pilots in the incredible eyes. Come on. George placed the huge palm of the freedom on the ground. George received other mecha pilots, and then flew to the broken dome base and started flying. All this happened in a very short time. As soon as George left the Tokyo area, a loud bang sound came from behind him, and a dazzling light burst out. Many people have fantasized about dropping a nuclear bomb on Mount Fuji, but they didn't expect that this feat would be realized by two chicken men with feet in basins. Smoke mixed with volcanic ash filled the top of Mount Fuji, and the crater was blown up even bigger in an instant. The head of the giant monster left in place reacted with the rare element in Mount Fuji, and exploded again under the help of the nuclear explosion. 1 + 1 is often greater than 2, and the same is true for this chain explosion. If there is only a nuclear explosion, even if the equivalent is a little larger, at most Mount Fuji will be flattened a little more. Now that there is a catalyst, it is different. A bigger explosion occurs instantly. When George returned to the command room, he saw that everyone was staring at what happened in Mount Fuji in a daze. This time, the eruption of Mount Fuji brought a devastating blow to the foot basin chicken, and the accompanying earthquakes and tsunamis made the situation worse. A week later, looking at the foot basin chicken island, that had basically disappeared from the map, the whole world fell into a continuous huge public opinion storm. At the beginning, a large number of public opinion storms were directed to George by people with ulterior motives, saying that he did not save the dying, allowed the disaster to happen, and that the foot basin chicken was the culprit. This time, the eruption of Mount Fuji did not ignite the Pacific Rim as Dr. Gottlieb predicted, but the foot basin chicken has basically disappeared. As for why it has basically disappeared, it is because there are still a few islands and reefs in the original area that will be exposed to the water at low tide, indicating that a country once existed. Finally, a video provided by George restored the truth of the matter. Hebian and Kudo of the Wormhole Church were unwilling to fail, so they used their authority to launch a large-yield nuclear bomb at the location where the giant monster died, hoping to use the nuclear bomb to achieve the goal of igniting the entire Pacific Rim. Unfortunately, things did not go as planned, and the sudden disappearance of the giant monster's body made the two people's goal come to nothing. Of course, George did not release the part where the monster disappeared in the video, as long as these people knew who the culprit was. Of course, the answer to how Kudo obtained the authority to launch the nuclear bomb disappeared in the long river of time with the disappearance of the foot basin chicken. The original voices accusing George also began to die down, and George ignored the public opinion from the outside world from beginning to end. Because, when the foot basin chicken began to fall into doomsday, he came to the top of the foot basin chicken and began to collect souls. George naturally would not give them the opportunity to continue to stay. Complete extinction is their final destination. More than 100 million souls can make the soul lake rise a lot. George, who was resting, was awakened by a hurried knock on the door. "What's wrong?" Liwen. George, who was dressed neatly, opened the door and asked. "The space store in Japan is open again," Shaolin said. "Oh, is there a monster coming out of it?" the two asked as they walked. "There is a level 5 monster," Shaolin said. "Okay, leave it to me," George said with a smile. Now all the mechas in the dome base have been damaged in the last battle, and it is not so easy for other bases to provide support, even if they want to. So, for the time being, the dome base only has George as a combat force, but this is enough. 2 nautical miles from the original Tokyo, George saw a monster with wings. Before the monster could react, George took the lead and killed it with a rifle shot. After dealing with the monster, George did not return with the monster immediately, but dragged the monster's body towards the wormhole. Because George knew that, in order to safely pass through the wormhole, he had to drag the monster's body with him, because this wormhole has a genetic detection function. With the help of this level 5 monster, that had not yet been named, George came to the other side of the wormhole. The moment he landed, George saw a huge red energy body like an eyeball, like the core of a sun, and the black of the eyeball in the middle was a black spot. That thing illuminated the world like the sun, reflecting the whole world into a dark red like magma. There seemed to be no living creatures living here, and there were barren gobi everywhere. Because of the red light emitted by energy, everything was dark red, and the whole ground was like boiling magma. At the same time, some places were placed with some dark blue devices emitting arcs, and there was a circle of ring-shaped devices like snake tails around them. Looking around, George found 3 insect-like creatures wearing bone crowns standing on a gobi platform, staring blankly in George's direction. Please. Chapter 213 The World of Pioneers. This space is filled with various toxic substances, and is not suitable for ordinary human life. Of course, this is not a problem for George. George was also very happy after seeing the 3 pioneers. The appearance of the real master will make the next things much easier. 2 of the 3 pioneers on the platform have the same bone crown on their heads, all in the shape of flowers, and their lower bodies have 4 branches, like spiders crawling. The one in the middle is different from the other 2. The bone crown on its head is like a trident falling behind its head, and the 2 feet of its lower body stand like lobster claws. This pioneer is about 3.7 meters tall, with 4 upper limbs and wing membranes attached. The 2 pioneers next to it are obviously shorter than it, or have a lower posture. Obviously, this pioneer is the supreme leader of this world. George changed his body shape, and appeared in front of the 3 pioneers in a black and red doomsday mecha. Before the 3 pioneers made any move, George used magic to control them. In area, a meaningless scream came from the mouth of the pioneer in the middle. Language barrier? That's easy. George's mental power connected with the pioneers in an instant. Unlike the connection with the mental connector, George's connection was unilaterally controlled by him. Human. The scream from the middle pioneer's mouth became something George could understand. Yes. George replied. Human, how can you speak the language of our pioneer world? The pioneer asked. We are using mental connection to communicate, but I'm too lazy to explain to the invaders, so I'll just look at it myself. George controlled the pioneer's consciousness after he finished speaking, and then began to search the pioneer's memory. It turned out that the pioneers were an alien colony creature and a high-end intelligent species in the universe. They lived on a planet called Antiverse. The environment of this planet was actually very bad, and was gradually dying out, making it less and less suitable for pioneers to live. Although they were very advanced in biotechnology and energy technology, their bodies were as fragile as humans, and had poor adaptability. According to their own historical records, the pioneers were a creature that evolved from some flying creatures. The pioneers have a strict social hierarchy. The highest decision-making body is the Cardinal Council, which is similar to the Senate of the ancient Roman Republic. Generally, the higher the status of the pioneers, the larger and whiter the crown formed by their exoskeleton. In fact, as early as the Triassic period of the Earth, the pioneer civilization in the underworld noticed the Earth. They praised this planet that can breed life. Because the Earth's environment at that time was not suitable for the pioneers to survive, their plan to colonize the Earth on a large scale was temporarily shelved. It was not until 2012 that the destruction of the environment by human activities made the Earth gradually become more and more like the underworld. The pioneers began to restart the colonization plan to the Earth, but the rapid development of human civilization forced them to accelerate the invasion process. Since the pioneers cannot fully adapt to the Earth's environment, there will be unpredictable risks if they invade rashly, so the Cardinal Council decided to send a customized giant biological weapon monster to the Earth to destroy large cities and hinder the development of human civilization. By searching the memories of this pioneer, George also had a general understanding of the pioneer civilization. This space is just a space connected to the wormhole, or it exists specifically as a monster factory. The undulating organic pool and countless animal breeding sacks below the platform were specially set up to cultivate monsters that attack the Earth. From the commander's memory, it was learned that the other 2 pioneers, as biological researchers in the pioneer world, were there to assist it in conquering the Earth. Unfortunately, the 3 pioneers did not know much about the energy core technology suspended in the sky. But since George had already taken a fancy to it, how could he give up easily? George modified the consciousness of the 3 pioneers, and after they were loyal to him, he took out a wooden box from the space. Opening the box, George took out a fist-sized seed, which was the seed of Pandora, that George had stored. As Pandora's seed was thrown into the organic pool below by George, a touch of green appeared instantly. Then it expanded rapidly at an unimaginable speed, and countless plants grew wantonly. Soon the huge organic pool was drained by Pandora, revealing the huge skeleton inside. Pandora is an unknown alien creature in a meteorite that fell to the earth in the world of Tomorrow's War. Moreover, it can purify toxins in the air. After absorbing water, it will grow and expand more crazily, become extremely aggressive, and cause great damage along the way. However, George can handle this kind of creature with consciousness very easily. After this, Pandora becomes huge. George uses soul control to make it docile. Through the transformation of Pandora, George found that it can indeed change the air in the surrounding area and purify toxins. Since Pandora is useful for turning the pioneer world into a world suitable for human life, then the next step becomes simple. First, George took out a few Pandora seeds again, and let them grow quickly. At the same time, using Pandora's ability to cultivate companion organisms, let these Pandoras cultivate companion organisms in large quantities at the roots. However, whether it is using Pandora to change the air quality here, or to cultivate companion organisms, it will not be completed in a few days, so George certainly will not wait here foolishly. Under the guidance of 3 pioneers, George passed through another small wormhole, and came to the pioneer's home planet, Antiverse. The planet is already devastated, with thick and poisonous clouds in the sky. The environment of the entire planet is extremely harsh, full of radiation and chemical pollution. Unfortunately, this species is too advanced and developed, and its lifespan is also very long. Long-term development will inevitably lead to overexploitation or use of resources on the planet. Just like Superman's hometown Krypton, the civilization is highly developed, which has exhausted the planet's resources. After mining to the Earth's crust, it finally couldn't bear it and exploded. The pioneer planet also faces the same problem, so they must find an alternative place to live in the universe, or a colony to ensure the continuation of the species. This is the fundamental reason why they created monsters to invade the Earth. After passing through the small wormhole, George also quickly controlled the pioneers on the other side. With a wave of George's hand, countless apocalypse demons were released by George. The apocalypse demons without armor looked even more terrifying. In the world of Rise of the Planet of the Apes, George transformed millions of apocalypse demons. If all of them were equipped with armor, it would be a huge amount of resources, and George didn't look down on ordinary armor, so George only equipped these apocalypse demons with energy rifles. The pioneers in the pioneer world have a long lifespan, so the population is not too large. There are only 1 million people, including many civilians and researchers. Therefore, there are not many pioneers who can fight. They mainly rely on large monsters cultivated by biotechnology to launch wars. George is mainly interested in the pioneers' biological and energy technology. George does not like the pioneers themselves as warriors. Therefore, there is no idea of using the unified power of the mother box to transform the pioneers into apocalypse demons. There is one more chapter. Please recommend, collect, and vote for me. Chapter 214, Pioneer Civilization. Earth, Broken Dome Base. 1 week later. Lewin, has Joe not come back yet? General Kwan asked. No. Shao Lewin said with a frown. That space channel has been closed. General Kwan replied. In fact, many people have already guessed that George drove the mecha into the wormhole with the corpse of the giant beast and then closed the wormhole. In the previous incident on Chicken Island, some people wanted to use public pressure to make George hand over his own mecha. Anyone with a discerning eye can see that the mecha is not ordinary. Unfortunately, the mecha was built by George himself after exchanging technology with Shaw Industries. If he disagrees, no one can take it away with legitimate reasons. Although in the early days of the monsters, the Pacific Rim countries worked together to share technology and jointly create super weapon mechas. However, this does not mean that individuals must also make selfless contributions. Otherwise there would not be giant companies like Shaw Industries and Anaheim Corporation. Unfortunately, all the calculations fell through after George disappeared. In the pioneer world, the highest building is the hub, the highest decision-making body. George stood on the top of the building, watching the flames of war everywhere. After arriving at the Pioneer planet, the Apocalypse Demon released by George caught the Pioneers off guard. As a power-concentrated social structure with the hub as the highest decision maker, the Pioneer civilization also has a relatively concentrated scientific research department. Therefore, George quickly obtained their advanced technology, and this planet full of sulfur dioxide and methane has lost its meaning of occupation under the Pioneers' wanton destruction. After getting the technology he wanted, George withdrew the remaining Apocalypse Demons. Although the Pioneer civilization is not good at personal force, the advanced technology has also created a lot of weapons, so the defenseless Apocalypse Demons also suffered losses. After recovering all the Apocalypse Demons, George took out the gloves, and then took out the power gem, and embedded it in the groove in the middle of the back of the gloves. Ding, as the power gem was embedded, the gloves also emitted a purple light, and then soon fell into piece again. George teleported to the high altitude of the planet, and then fell rapidly in a diving posture. Boom. Crack. At the moment of landing, the right fist with the power gem hit the surface of the planet heavily. How could the desolate planet withstand such a powerful punch? The bottomless cracks began to spread rapidly with George as the center. Magma also sprayed out from the ground, accompanied by violent earthquakes, and the whole planet seemed to explode at any time. After George put away his gloves, he immediately opened the portal and returned to the monster hatching space. Feeling that the air between several Pandoras had obviously improved, George began to further transform Pandoras. First of all, they recognized the Master. George's recognition of the Master was not to recognize George as the Master, but to give Pandoras the ability to recognize a certain kind of DNA. This space was George's gift to the world, and George would naturally arrange it. Anyone who did not have this DNA would be attacked by Pandora's companion creatures when entering this space. As for this space, whether they would continue to use it to cultivate giant beasts, or transform it into a living space in the future, that was not George's concern. After dealing with Pandoras, George opened the portal again, and this time George returned to the Broken Dome base. Drive Cairo is back. Cairo, you are finally back. Cairo, where have you been these days? Many people who were familiar with George came to greet George, and George smiled in response. Cairo. Spider-Gwen, who hurried over when she heard George coming back, shouted, "Long time no see, Spider-Gwen." George looked at the beauty in front of him and said with a smile. Spider-Gwen took a few quick steps and plunged into George's arms. After a little thought, George also gently hugged Spider-Gwen's shoulders. In fact, after experiencing many worlds, except for the earliest Naruto world, George never had an emotional entanglement with people in the plane. One is that there is no time, and the other is that he does not want to experience the feeling of loss. After all, the speed of time on both sides is different. If it is an ordinary person, he cannot accompany George for too long. However, as George obtained the sole authority of the DC world, this has also changed. George can already discover the slight difference in the souls of people in different planes. George can now use chaos energy to wash away that little difference. In a more fantasy way, George can use chaos energy to cut off the connection between the soul and the original plane. In the process of getting along with Spider-Gwen, George could also feel that Spider-Gwen had a special feeling for him. However, George knew that it was completely nonsense to say how much he loved Spider-Gwen. Therefore, George was ready to give the choice to Spider-Gwen. When he was about to leave, he would have a good talk with Spider-Gwen. If she was willing, George would naturally be happy to find a companion for Alice. Cairo. A steady voice interrupted the warm moment at this time. Sorry, although I don't want to disturb you too, we still have many questions to consult Cairo, so. General Kwan said with a smile. Ah, you guys chat, I still have official business to deal with. After Spider-Gwen reacted, she blushed and left here quickly. George found that this time, not only General Kwan came to see him, but also General Lee and generals from other member countries of PPDC. The difference can be seen from the different uniforms. Oh, I wonder why the generals came to see me this time. George said, looking at the many generals with medals on their chests. Let's talk in the conference room. After all, this is not a place to talk. General Kwan said, and winked at George at an angle that others could not see. That's right. That's right. After George and all the generals were seated, General Lee, who was familiar with George, said, "First of all, congratulations to Joe for successfully killing the level 5 monster." Wow. There was a warm applause. This time, all the generals from the member countries of PPDC gathered here, mainly to thank you, George, for your outstanding contribution in the last super monster attack. Although you are not a regular mecha warrior, your contribution this time is obvious to all. There will be a special commendation meeting next. Let me communicate with you here first. General Lee continued, after listening to the applause. That's right, Kairo-san, you have paid a lot for the safety of the earth. A short general said. Hey, didn't the foot basin chicken sink? Why is General Foot Basin Chicken still here? Looking at George's puzzled eyes, General Kwan explained. General Matsushita was able to survive the last disaster because he attended the meeting in the United States. George immediately showed a look of understanding. Vote. Chapter 215 Back to Marvel. General Lee glanced at the other meeting members and said with a look of surprise, "But the other generals have other things to talk to you about, so let them talk to you in person. Let me tell you, Kairo-san, as a very powerful researcher, it is better for professionals to do such dangerous things as driving a mecha. We are going to invest in building a state-of-the-art research institute for you in the United States. What do you think?" Matsushita began to say with an expression of concern for you. "Oh, so good," George said with a smile. "Of course, we believe that Mr. George will come up with more scientific and technological achievements that are beneficial to the development and progress of mankind in the future." General James of the United States said. "Of course, Joe, your mecha is so powerful that it would be a waste if it was left there. We discussed it and found that now is the time when we need military force, so we are going to buy the Liberty for $3.5 billion US. What do you think?" Matsushita said with a smile. "No, I'm not interested in your conditions. Thank you very much for your concern, generals. I just came back and there are still many things to deal with, so I'll leave you first." George stood up and left the meeting room. Matsushita and the others didn't understand. They were communicating just fine. How come their faces changed in the blink of an eye? "Kairo-san," Matsushita shouted. "Mr. George." After a while, General Lee knocked on George's door. "I'm very sorry, Kairo," General Lee said. "I understand, General Lee, so you don't have to apologize. This matter has nothing to do with you." George smiled and said, "I have good news for you." "Oh, what news?" General Lee asked curiously. "Aren't you curious about where I went?" George asked back. "Of course I'm curious, but if you don't want to say it, we won't force you," General Lee said. "Because I did go to the other side of the wormhole," George said. "What?" General Lee was surprised. "Then how did you come back?" "That's not important. The important thing is that there will be no more giant beasts attacking the Earth in the future," George said. "Is this true?" General Lee asked. "Of course, and I brought you a gift." George handed over a USB flash drive after he finished speaking. "Is this the third USB flash drive?" General Lee looked at the USB flash drive in his hand and sighed. "Yes," George said with a smile. "I have recorded what I got there and some other things in the USB flash drive. I believe that with the seniors from the Academy of Science and Technology here, you will make good use of these things." General Lee patted George on the shoulder and invited him, "Come back to the capital with me this time. Many people have been wanting to see you." "Wait a little longer, I still have some things to do." George declined tactfully. Knock, knock. There was another knock on the door. "Kairo, it's me, Lewen," Lewen said outside the door. "Okay, think about it again. I won't be a light bulb," General Lee said jokingly. George smiled and didn't answer. After opening the door, General Lee greeted Lewen and left here quickly under the protection of the guards. "Kairo, are you okay?" Lewen asked George, who had been standing at the door and watching General Lee leave. "It's okay, I'm just feeling that this is a group of respectable people," George said as he looked at General Lee and his group going away. "Yes, it is with these most respectable people that the Republic can maintain prosperity and stability," Lewen also said with emotion. "Okay, let's not talk about that. Lewen, walk with me." George said softly. Okay, Sheolwyn said with a smile. It was already evening. The setting sun in the sky slowly penetrated the thin clouds, and the sunset glow burned like a flame, intoxicating. The early autumn sea breeze blew in, bringing a hint of coolness. They were standing on an observation deck at this time, looking at the waves in the distance under the setting sun, and the waves were beating under the rocks. Cairo. Liwen. The two said in unison. You go first. George looked at Sheolwyn and said. Well, Cairo. I want to date you. Sheolwyn said with courage. Then do you understand me? George asked. I understand. You are talented. You have a house. Sheolwyn replied immediately. I understand what you mean, but Liwen, maybe you don't know, I'm not from this world. What does that mean? Sheolwyn asked with a pale face. I come from another world. Then George briefly introduced himself. Of course, he only told Sheolwyn that he was a plane traveler and introduced Alice's situation in the Marvel world. After George finished his introduction, both of them fell silent. You are a plane traveler, and you are already 100 years old? Sheolwyn asked after a short silence. Yes, this is my general situation. I will leave this world tomorrow morning. I don't deny my good feelings for you, so it's up to you to choose. If you choose to be with me, then you have to give up everything in this world. George said. Then, Sheolwyn wanted to say something, but suddenly stopped. Think about it carefully. I understand that this decision is not simple. George looked into Sheolwyn's eyes and said. 3 days later, Marvel World, Ancient Star. Joe, is this the Marvel world you mentioned? Sheolwyn asked, looking at the sparkling lake outside the window. Of course not, this is just one of my base planets. George replied with a smile. In fact, on the night when the two talked, Sheolwyn found George. Between career and George, she chose George. Then George gave Sheolwyn 3 days to handle the business of Shaw Industries. After all, as the helmsman of Shaw Industries, even if he was leaving, there were still many businesses that needed to be explained clearly. George himself stayed in a deserted place for 3 days. Because George knew how big a storm the USB flash drive he handed in would cause. George not only recorded in detail the detailed technology needed to build a spacecraft and the treatment technology of nuclear pollution, but also recorded the wormhole technology, biotechnology and other information plundered from the pioneer civilization on it. Of course, George also left the spatial coordinates of that space on the USB flash drive, and introduced Pandora and its companion creatures. 3 days later, when Sheolwyn had dealt with the matter, George appeared in her office again, and then the two disappeared again in the horrified eyes of other people in the office. On the Ancient Star, George took Liwen to rest for 2 days before opening the portal again, and returning to Hogwarts Island. There was no tit-for-tat situation when the two women met. One was that Sheolwyn had known about Alice's existence for a long time, and on the other hand, Alice, as a princess from the British royal family, was accustomed to such things. Moreover, Alice was not opposed to having someone to accompany her. So after the two girls met, they quickly became familiar with each other. Alice also took the initiative to teach Liwen magic. In her words, she finally had someone to practice magic with her. There is one more chapter. Please recommend, collect, and vote for me. Chapter 216 Employee Benefits. Sheolwyn had just arrived in the Marvel world, so George naturally wanted to take her around and introduce some people to her. Boss, congratulations. Jirying said to George, holding a glass of wine. Although George had a clone in the outside world, he was mainly responsible for dealing with matters related to SHIELD, and the specific management of the company was still carried out by Jirying. So, this time when George brought Sheolwyn to the company, he held a cocktail party. Of course, the main attendees were all the company's senior executives. Thank you. How is it? Is there any difficulty in the company? George asked. No, the company's development momentum has been very good. Jirying said with a smile. In addition, those shadow companies have also become giants in various industries. However, Stark Industries has developed rapidly in the past 2 years and has seized part of the arms market share. That doesn't matter. After all, Howard Stark is also a genius, not to mention that he has the support of the military. George said with a smile. By the way, I will give you a technical document about mechanical exoskeletons later. George was going to take out the mechanical exoskeleton technology obtained from the Tomorrow War. Now it has come to 1985, and technologies like mechanical exoskeletons can be taken out. This kind of exoskeleton, which becomes as simple as the one in Elysium after castration, has a battery life of 12 hours, and can greatly improve the wearer's strength and speed. George plans to equip his own security company with this kind of mechanical exoskeleton first, and then occupy the military industry market through military orders. In recent years, under the vigorous development of Heir and Bucky, the number of personnel in the security company has approached 70,000, and this does not include the special combat power of the Power Rangers. So once the security company's personnel are equipped with mechanical exoskeletons, the combat effectiveness of these personnel will be greatly improved. Okay, boss. Heir nodded and said, boss, I have a private matter that I want to trouble you with. Oh, what private matter? Tell me about it. George said curiously. It's about the Inhumans. You know that I have been gathering the tribesmen for these years. A long time ago, a tribesman found the relics left by the predecessors, which gave us the crystal for sustainable awakening of superpowers. Heir introduced. That's great. How did you encounter any problems? George asked. Yes, the difference between the Inhumans after awakening is too great. Some tribesmen have non-human characteristics after undergoing the awakening ceremony. Therefore, the living area I originally arranged for them is no longer suitable for them to continue living. Heir explained to George. Well, this is a problem. George nodded. To be honest, George did not think of introducing Heir to Atlantis, because Atlantis is actually saturated. They already need a violent coup to reduce the population. Bringing these Inhumans on Earth, there is not a good way out. George looked at the many company executives who had followed him for decades at the meeting, and then made a decision. This is simple. I have already thought of a place that is definitely suitable for your aliens to live in. George said with a smile. Thank you very much, boss. Heir said happily. The next day, George took Heir and Shaolei went to the #1 city of Guxing. After the city was built, there was a group of prisoners living here except for the early morning. Later, it was completely idle. Now it is just right to use it. Standing at the highest point of the city, George pointed to the city under his feet and asked Heir, what do you think of it? Heir looked at the green city and said, boss, although this city is very good, it is too big. If it is only for my people to live in, it will be a bit of a waste. Not bad. George nodded and said, but what if it is used as a company welfare? Company welfare? Heir asked doubtfully. Not bad. It has the best air quality and the best medical and health conditions. As long as it is not a terminal disease like cancer, it can be treated here. In the future, it can also have the best educational conditions, so it can be open to company employees. George said. Boss, really? Thank you on behalf of all the employees of the company. Heir said happily. That's our own employee. This matter is left to you. As for your people, you can live in this city first, and then find a piece of pure land on this planet. I will arrange robots to help you build all the infrastructure. George pointed to the large piece of land outside the city and said, thank you, boss. How can we get between here and the Earth? Heir asked. When the time comes, I will build a portal on my island. Whether you come here for vacation or to settle down, you can go in and out through the portal. When George wanted to develop this planet, he had already thought of a way to deal with this problem. It happened that the wormhole technology was obtained from the pioneer civilization, and it only needed to be built. Then, will the boss expose the things on your island? Heir asked. It doesn't matter. When the time comes, everyone will take a closed bus and enter here through the portal. And every employee who applies to enter here, I will let Bucky examine them to ensure their loyalty to the company. George explained. Then there is no problem. I will go back and arrange the transfer of the people. Heir said. Okay, then you go first. George waved his hand and opened a portal leading directly to Heir's office. Goodbye, boss. Heir said goodbye and walked into the portal. After closing the portal, George noticed Shaolei Wen's curious eyes. "What's wrong, Lewin?" George asked. "Nothing, it's just that your magic is too amazing." Lewin sighed. "Silly, don't worry, you will learn these magics soon." George scratched Lewin's nose and said, "Okay, wait for a while, I'll find a manager for this planet." "Okay." Lewin stood aside. George took out 2 clay sculptures, then waved his hand, and released 2 criminals, a man and a woman, from the space. These were captured by George in a New York prison. These 2 people were the kind of bad guys who were unforgivable, and it was not a pity to kill them. They were captured by George and reused as waste. Then he broke the 2 clay sculptures, and released 2 weak souls. As soon as these 2 souls were released, they were stuffed into the bodies on the ground by George. Under George's observation, he could see that the 2 foreign souls quickly devoured the original souls. After entering the soul space, the originally weak souls also recovered a lot at this time. When the 2 souls merged with the 2 bodies had undergone a complete change. After the 2 people on the ground opened their eyes, they immediately knelt at George's feet and shouted, "Master, please. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels." Chapter 217 Military Products Exhibition. "Very good, get up," George said. "Yes, Master." X to the 2 who just resurrected were none other than the Enchantress brother and sister that George had brought back from the world of Suicide Squad a long time ago. These 2 have been completely controlled by George over the years, and it is just right for them to manage the planet now. Even if they are scheming, they cannot escape the methods of this pair of wizards. "Enchantress, from now on, you 2 will help me manage this planet, and I will let Wiki assist you," George said to the brother and sister in front of him. "Okay, Master," the brother and sister replied respectfully. "Enchantress, this is your heart. If there are things that cannot be solved, you can contact me through Wiki." George took out another heart with green light and said, "Thank you, my master. Thank you for giving us a new life." Enchantress knelt down again and said, "Since it is a new life, the previous name should not be used. From now on, you will be called Judy, and your brother will be called Juan." George said to the 2, "Thank you for the name, Master." Judy and Juan said respectfully. In the next 10 days, George set up a space wormhole between Gooksing and the Earth. The entrance to the wormhole on the Earth was set by George in a separate building on Hogwarts Island, and the entire building looked like a cave. As the first group of people to move in, the Inhumans, under the arrangement of Jiring, took a special bus to enter Hogwarts Island after verification, and then went directly through the wormhole to Gooksing City number 1 without stopping. After things got on track, George no longer focused on it. After playing in the Marvel world, Lewin naturally fell into the pursuit of magic. No woman can resist the pursuit of eternal youth, so when the 2 beauties studied magic together, George became free again. This kind of leisure is naturally relative. In fact, George still has a lot of things to do. For example, after being able to achieve molecular level control, with Pi particles as a model and the power gem as a shortcut, George naturally wants to take the control level 1 step further. At that time, George would not need Pi particles at all, and could control the ability to make matter bigger or smaller at will. And after he has the ability to control atoms, he can selectively develop and strengthen the abilities of the Inhumans. Of course, these are just George's predictions about atomic control, and he himself cannot reach this level for the time being. However, if he masters the methods and shortcuts, it is only a matter of time before he can completely control it. Half a year later, the time has come to 1986. After continuous efforts, George has completely completed atomic control. With huge computing power and knowledge accumulation, he can already complete the mutual transformation between substances. Minister, here is the information of the new director of S.H.I.E.L.D. You need to sign and confirm it. Alexander Pierce handed over a document and said, "Okay, Pierce." George smiled and looked at the steady middle-aged man in front of him and said, Alexander Pierce, a former White House office clerk, was later assigned to George as an assistant. In recent years, he has become the head of the action group within SHIELD. And George knew that Pierce had joined Hydra at this time and became a force that cannot be ignored within Hydra. Pierce, what do you think of Keller? George asked. Very good, otherwise he would not have been selected as the new director, right? Pierce replied. You are right. George smiled and then handed the file to Pierce. Just as Pierce took the file and turned to leave, George suddenly asked, Pierce, do you think you have a chance to become the director? Minister, I don't understand what you mean. Pierce said puzzledly. Nothing, just take it as my expectation of you. George said with a smile. Thank you, Minister. Pierce said and pushed the door and left the office. Looking at the time, today is a day when the US military holds a military product exhibition. Looking at the time, since there is nothing to do here, George is ready to take a look. George drove his Vision GT with a logo and started driving towards Washington. There are many profitable businesses in this world, and military products are undoubtedly one of the most profitable businesses. There are many companies participating in this military expo. George's own Star Industries and Harwood Stark Industries are undoubtedly the most watched companies. Accompanied by Heir, George visited the products of Stark Industries. Advanced protective clothing, advanced headgear, and high-precision missiles are all very good products. Unlike Stark Industries, which is high-tech, many of George's products occupy a single exhibition hall. From pistols to missiles, from trucks to fighter jets, even aerospace satellite products, George's company is involved, and this is the result of George's deliberate slowdown. George only brought out some of the more classic products in the current era, and George has not brought out more advanced designs. However, this time is different, because the mechanical exoskeleton mecha exhibited by the company this time attracted the attention of all participants. Why is the US military so obsessed with studying super soldier serum? Isn't it to make all soldiers super soldiers? What is a super soldier? Strong strength, fast speed, and strong reaction ability are undoubtedly one of the reference data. If this goal can be achieved through external equipment, it will be easy for the military to accept it. After all, compared with the uncontrollable injection of serum, this effect of increasing the combat effectiveness of soldiers through equipment is also safer and more reliable. So when George went around outside and returned to his company's exhibition hall, he saw a group of military generals standing in the display area of mechanical exoskeleton products. In addition, there are many private armed forces, such as security companies, some lower-level weapons dealers, and so on. Naturally, there is no shortage of other weapons manufacturers. George and Heir naturally do not need to squeeze through the crowd. After George walked to the booth, the things outside were handed over to Heir to handle. Hey, Ms. Heir, you are finally here. A general of the army who has a good relationship with the Star Group greeted Heir after seeing her. Gentlemen are very welcome to visit our exhibition hall. Heir greeted everyone generously. Okay, our time is very tight. Let's talk about the product first. I wonder if the equipment launched by your company can achieve the publicity effect. This is obviously a general who is not close to the Star Group. Thank you very much for your attention to our company's products. Everyone should know that our company's product reputation has been good over the years. We still disdain to do false propaganda. Heir said with a smile. There is one more chapter. Please recommend, collect, and vote for the monthly ticket. Chapter 218, The Future Iron Man. Many people were attracted by the mechanical exoskeleton. The mechanical exoskeleton A1 is our flagship product this year. It has been promoted within our security company. As introduced before, this is a mechanical exoskeleton that performs very well in terms of balance, mechanical performance, and failure rate. Heir continue to introduce. In the future, we will continue to improve it so that it can provide more functions. Next, she played a training video of the company's security personnel wearing this device. The technology of this mechanical exoskeleton is very mature, and its performance is naturally not bad. Moreover, as the first company to launch this combat platform, their company naturally has a crushing advantage, which makes everyone who sees it shine from the heart. At this time, the boss of a private armed force asked, "What is its price?" "This is our biggest concern." Jiaring smiled slightly and replied politely, 100,000 US dollars. It only takes this much to take it away. As long as you have such an exoskeleton equipment, the soldiers will be multiplied in strength and speed. If necessary, we can provide actual combat simulation. This price made many people excited. For top private armed forces, this price is not unacceptable. The only question is whether the actual combat capability of the mechanical exoskeleton can reach the level of publicity. Miss Jiaring, if your company's mechanical exoskeleton is really as good as you say now, I promise that you will get a large order from the army. A major general of the army promised. Narland smiled and said, of course, I promise there is nothing false. Then the Air Force and the Navy also made the same promise. Although they have no combat demand for this kind of mechanical exoskeleton, it can also improve efficiency when used for transportation, so it is natural to buy a small amount of it. As for those private armed companies, they are not in a hurry to speak. This is a normal operating procedure. Most companies will sign a real contract only after a real combat demonstration. What Jiaring did not introduce is the battery problem. After George's modification, the current battery, George selected a disposable battery with a service life of 120 hours. This battery is temporarily priced at 20,000 yuan per piece. As for the cost, it is only 2,000 yuan. It earns a tenfold difference. Xingchen Group is indeed a charitable company. The military expo ended successfully. As the main force, the army directly ordered 300 mechanical exoskeletons that are relatively mature. The Navy and the Air Force bought 100 units in total. Of course, this is just the treatment enjoyed by supergroups like the Star Group. The number is not large, which can be regarded as an expression of their attention. In fact, the real trading can only start after the actual combat test. After the military expo gradually ended, the generals from the military left and the weapons dealers gradually dispersed. George also walked to the front desk at this time, and at this time Howard came over with a teenager. Minister, I didn't expect you to come to participate in this military expo in person. Howard said. Oh, Howard, you don't need to call me minister outside, just call me by my name. George said. Let's call you minister. It's not appropriate to call you by your name directly. Howard said. You must know that, whether it is George as the Minister of the World Security Council, or his own business achievements, or his own aristocratic status, it is not something that ordinary people can achieve at will. Now, except for Alice and Shaolin, who are close to him, no one calls George by his name. Whatever you want. The little man next to you is your son, right? George asked Tony Stark, who was still a young boy at the time. Yes, this is my son Anthony Edward Stark. You can just call him Tony. Howard said proudly. I have heard of your name, a young genius, making circuit boards at the age of 1, building engines at the age of 6, and entering MIT at the age of 14. Tony, we are still alumni. George said to Tony Stark with a proud face. In his previous life, when George watched movies, his favorite character was Iron Man, because he was the most humane hero, and the saying that he was comparable to gods with human bodies was not just talk. However, this guy's indeed pitiful, losing his parents at a young age. Then he was betrayed by a Badiatstain, whom he regarded as his godfather, and almost finished. After getting married, and finally having a daughter, he sacrificed his life for the earth. Of course, his playboy personality at the beginning was really hard to like. So the little boy now needs to be trained well, and George now naturally doesn't need to flatter others, so facing the arrogant Tony, he only praised him a few words. Tony Stark looked at the mechanical exoskeleton on the booth with a proud face, and then said proudly, the thing is very ordinary, but the idea is very novel, and the sensor technology is good. If I want, I can definitely make a better product, but I don't bother to use other people's ideas. Jiaring, who had been standing aside without saying anything, saw someone belittling the technology brought out by his boss, and his face suddenly looked bad. Tony. Howard immediately scolded. Haha, you have a lot of ideas. Not bad. I also believe that you can do better. George looked at Tony and said with a smile, you are really like your father. I remember when he first met me, he told old Stark that he must surpass me. Right, Howard. Compared with Tony's curiosity, the most surprised person was Howard himself. Because he also clearly remembered that when he said this sentence, there were only him and his father around. How did George know what he said? This was incredible. "Ah, Minister," Howard said in surprise. "Okay, Howard, don't be nervous. I really think highly of Tony. This kid will definitely surpass you in his future achievements, to a level you can't imagine. So, spend more time with your children when you have time. There is no end to the work." Although George looked down on Howard, a real businessman, he didn't mind saying a few more words because of Tony. Because George remembered that Tony Stark's childhood was not very good. Although he had no worries about food and clothing, Howard focused on research and development. His wife had to take care of Howard and help him manage the company, so she had very little time to accompany Stark. So, for Stark, his childhood was not happy. His arrogant personality, his character of being difficult to get along with, and being difficult to get along with were slowly developed in this way. He was like a child who never grew up, always trying to attract attention in unexpected ways. Stark also went through many things before he changed from an arrogant playboy to the heroic Iron Man. In this life, with the addition of George, his fate will naturally be rewritten. At least he doesn't need to snap his fingers at the cost of his life. Please. Chapter 219 Ant-Man Project. Howard didn't expect George to think so highly of his son. In fact, the relationship between the two is not that good. When S.H.I.E.L.D. was established, Howard promised a lot of conditions, including that the developed technology would be jointly owned by both parties. However, over the years, Stark Industries has developed rapidly using the advanced technology developed, and the original promise has never been fulfilled. Even within S.H.I.E.L.D., George, as the Minister of the World Security Council, does not have many opportunities to deal with him. I didn't expect Tony to be so valued by the Minister. Thank you very much. The Minister is right. There is no end to the work. I will take time to accompany him more. Howard patted Tony on the shoulder and said, "I hope so. I won't waste your time. The person over there is waiting for you. He has been waiting for a long time. Tony can come to me if he needs help." George patted Tony on the shoulder and said. Howard also looked back at the entrance of the exhibition hall and said, "Oh, it's Sebastian, the general manager of Stark Industries. Then, Minister, we will take our leave first. Goodbye." "Thank you, Mr. Orwell, although I don't think there will be a day when I need help," Tony said. "Who knows, this promise is valid forever. Goodbye, Howard, Tony," George said meaningfully. After the two sides said goodbye, Howard took Tony to a Sebastian. Tony also looked back at George, the stranger who showed that he valued him very much when they met for the first time. In fact, it was not the first time Tony heard George's name. As one of the smartest people in the world, he would naturally study advanced technology, and the technology of George's star group is undoubtedly a good research object, so Tony naturally has some understanding of the founder of this company. After Howard and his group walked away, Jirying asked, "Boss, is there anything special about the kid named Tony just now?" What I said to Howard before was not a compliment. He will become one of the most dazzling people in the world, George said with a smile. On the other side, Howard communicated with Sebastian about the company's affairs, and then took Tony out of the exhibition hall. "Dad, are you familiar with that gentleman?" Tony asked Howard on the way home. Howard, who was sitting next to Tony, recalled the scene of his first meeting with George. At that time, he was as young as Tony now. Thinking back to the establishment of S.H.I.E.L.D. by the few people the colonel had passed away, Carter often carried out undercover missions and often disappeared for several years. Only he and George stayed in S.H.I.E.L.D. all year round. However, although he is now one of the 2 or 3 people with the highest power in S.H.I.E.L.D., the other party's influence in S.H.I.E.L.D. is not lower than his own. Although George never interferes with the specific affairs of S.H.I.E.L.D., he was the first to form the action team. And even in the R&D department that Howard is in charge of, the earliest batch of researchers were also mobilized from George's company. Therefore, no matter in any aspect, Howard never dared to look down on the other party. "Dad?" Tony shouted again when he saw that Howard did not answer him. "Well, oh, not very familiar, but like that gentleman said, when I first met him, I was about the same age as you are now. Howard replied. So, you call him minister? Tony asked. Well, that was a long time ago. We worked together in the Manhattan Project. At that time, he served as minister. Howard lied. Out of love for Tony Stark, Howard did not reveal the things about S.H.I.E.L.D. You know, S.H.I.E.L.D. is the largest spy organization on the earth, and there must be many shady places. This is what Howard did not want him to get in touch with, so he concealed it. Then is he really 80 years old? Tony asked. Yes, according to accurate records, he is indeed 80 years old this year. Howard smiled and replied. Then how come he? Tony asked. Are you talking about why he looks so young? Howard asked after Tony's words. Yes. Tony replied. Do you know about the youth potion? Howard asked back. Yes, it is a very expensive healthcare drug. Tony replied. Yes, but what you don't know is that the potion sold for $100 million is just a defective product. Now many people speculate that there is a more precious potion that can prolong people's life, Howard said, and, in fact, many people know that his successor a few years ago was actually himself. Really? Tony said in surprise. Of course, that magical potion is very popular. The top people are using this potion, so in recent years, if you are careful, you will find that group of people have rarely appeared in public. Howard explained. Oh, that's it. Tony said thoughtfully. What Howard said is indeed the truth. After George's improvement, the youth potion, although it cannot make people live longer, can make the person who takes it still look young before death. This alone has made many people pursue it, not to mention that it can also keep the person who takes it energetic. Of course, the only flaw may be the high price. It takes $100 million every year to maintain youth, which can no longer be described as expensive in this era, but George's potion still has no shortage of customers. So, Tony, although I don't know why he thinks so highly of you, it's your honor to be valued by him. If one day you really encounter a problem that you can't solve, remember his promise. Maybe it can save you once. Howard said seriously. Okay, Dad, I remember. Although Tony didn't take it seriously, he nodded and replied under Howard's serious expression. The mechanical exoskeleton device launched by George's company is selling well again. It is not only favored by the military, but even SHIELD has purchased a lot of it. George saw this expenditure item in the financial statements of SHIELD at the end of the year. Along with the financial statements, there were also personnel expansion and the Ant-Man plan. Financial statements and personnel expansion are old dramas that happen every year, so George quickly signed on it. The director of SHIELD in this era is still honest. Although as a member of Hydra, he often adds some Hydra members to SHIELD through personnel expansion, but there is no problem with the finances. He is not like the black-brained egg in the future, who use the so-called hierarchical management to create information asymmetry, and then made up excuses to embezzle public funds and build safe houses for himself all over the world. The most annoying thing is that in the future he directly set up a SWORD in space and left the mess of SHIELD to Coulson. He is simply not a human being. There is one more chapter. Please recommend, collect, and vote for me. Chapter 220 Hank Pym. George picked up the Ant-Man plan, which is a superhero plan built around Hank Pym. Since Hank Pym invented the Pym particles and further improved his Ant controller, he, who is still young, is unwilling to be lonely like many young people. At the beginning, he was just a street hero on the street, fighting criminals. After the scientist Dr. Dyne was killed by Hydra disguised as a robber, his daughter Janet Van Dyne approached Hank, hoping to avenge her father with the Pym particles. Hank told Janet his identity and gave her the Pym particles to make her the Wasp. After that, the two worked together to arrest the Hydra, and the two became partners and lovers. Not long after the Hydra was arrested, he died in prison. The affairs of Dr. Pym and his wife were naturally known by the Hydra in SHIELD, so there was this plan in George's hand. Of course, George had no opinion on this, but just thought about the time. If George's memory was correct, it should be very close to Janet entering the quantum space. On Hogwarts Island, George looked at the boy practicing archery by the lake and couldn't help but smile. Time flies. Bucky also looked at the boy and said, "Not bad. You have taught everything you should teach. You can arrange for him to go out." George said, "Oh, I feel a little reluctant to let him leave suddenly." Bucky shook his head and said, "Yes, after all, I have watched him grow up since he was a child." George also nodded. At this time, the boy saw the two people standing under the tree and immediately ran over here. "Hello, sir." "Hello, instructor." The boy greeted respectfully after running closer. "Not bad, Barton. Your archery is already perfect," George encouraged. This boy was the future Hawkeye Clinton Francis Barton, who was brought to the island by George and raised by Bucky himself. "It's all because of the instructor's good teaching," Barton said after scratching his hair. "That's because you are talented. I didn't teach you much in archery." Bucky patted Barton on the shoulder and said proudly, "Okay, you all performed well. Patton, haven't you always wanted to see the outside world? Now is the time." George said, "Really, sir, can I go out?" Patton said excitedly. "Of course, I'm not lying." George said, "No, sir, I don't mean that." Patton immediately said nervously, "Okay, I don't know you, kid." George rubbed Patton's hair and said with a smile, "This is the identity arranged for you, but you will have to rely on yourself after you go out." "This?" Patton stopped there. "Instructor, did I do something wrong?" Patton said with his head down. "Haha, you misunderstood. It is because I think highly of you that I'll let you perform a long-term mission," Bucky said with a big laugh. "Really?" Patton looked up at George and asked. "Of course. This is a gift for you." George handed over a watch and said, "Thank you, sir." Then Patton happily took it. "Patton, since you have to carry out this mission, you will not be strengthened for the time being. After all, you cannot be too outstanding. This watch has a communication function, which can be used to contact Wiki at any time. If you encounter difficulties in the future, you can ask for Wiki's help. If there are any arrangements here, they will be issued through the watch," George explained. "Yes, I understand, sir," Patton said respectfully. "I will arrange for you to join the FBI in a few years. At that time, you just need to perform well." George continued to explain, worried that Patton would have a burden in his heart. "Yes, sir." Patton immediately stood at attention and replied. 3 months later, S.H.I.E.L.D. received news that a separatist faction hijacked a missile silo in Kursk, the Soviet Union, and prepared to launch an intercontinental missile to the United States to attack important facilities in the United States, thereby provoking a war between the two countries. How could S.H.I.E.L.D., which is committed to peace, sit back and watch such a thing happen? So it sent Hank Pym and his wife Janet to carry out the mission. The mission did not go smoothly at the beginning. When Hank and Janet subdued their opponents, the missile flying to the United States had already been ignited and launched. Hank and Janet shrank at the last moment and climbed onto the ICBM. They were ready to destroy the missile after it flew into the ocean and prevent it from entering the United States. Unfortunately, the shell of the ICBM was made of the strongest titanium metal, and it was impossible to destroy it from the outside with the tools Hank and Janet carried. The only way to get into the missile was to pass through the solid titanium. At this time, only Hank could shrink himself to smaller than a molecule to disarm the missile. But Hank's Pym regulator was too badly damaged in the previous battle, and Janet didn't hesitate at this time. She turned off the regulator, shrunk herself to the subatomic level, disarmed the missile, but was trapped in the quantum realm from then on. Although the mission was completed, Hank Pym was also severely hit. In the following months, Hank no longer accepted missions, took off his Ant-Man suit, and stopped studying Ant-Man technology. "Hey, Hank." Howard greeted Hank after meeting him at the door of S.H.I.E.L.D. "Oh, it's Howard." Hank responded tiredly. "How are you doing lately?" Howard asked with concern. "Yes, I'm fine," Hank said with a smile. "How is Hope doing recently?" Mary said she wants to invite Hope to visit if she has the chance. Howard asked. Hope Van Dyne is the daughter of Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne, and she is 7 years old this year. Hope, she's fine. Please thank Mary for me, but I don't have time to take care of Hope, so I've sent her to boarding school, Hank said. She's only 7 years old, Hank. You need to cheer up. Your daughter needs you, and the Strategic Homeland Defense Attack and Logistics Support Agency also needs you. Howard patted Hank on the shoulder and said, "Okay, I know. I have something else to do, so I'll leave first." Hank didn't want to listen to anyone's preaching at this time, so he said something to Howard and then opened the lobby. Howard watched Hank walk into the elevator, muttering something. If there were people nearby, they would have heard what Howard said at this moment. Pime particles. Pime particles are magical particles that can change the structure of reality. There must be more than one person who covets this kind of particle. At this moment, a voice sounded from behind Howard. Is he still in grief? Please. Chapter 221 Hydra Director. Howard was frightened and turned around suddenly. "Oh, it's Director Mitchell Carson. When did you come?" "I just arrived, and I saw you chatting with Hank, so I didn't disturb you," Mitchell said with a smile. "Besides, Howard, didn't I tell you that you can just call me Keller?" "Okay, Keller. You're right." Hank is still immersed in sadness and hasn't come out of it, Howard said with a concerned look. In fact, Howard didn't like the new director of S.H.I.E.L.D. who was airborne. But there was no way. He still had a lot of experiments to do and had no time to serve as the director. Moreover, Howard also knew that, after accepting the US government's incorporation, S.H.I.E.L.D. had been out of their control. As one of the smartest people in the world, Howard couldn't fail to see the changes in S.H.I.E.L.D., but he just thought that those people were the tentacles of the US government inserted into S.H.I.E.L.D. Maybe Howard didn't expect that these people were the Hydra they once determined to eliminate. "Janet's matter is really a pity. I heard that Hank has a daughter," Mitchell asked. "Yes, his name is Hope, and he should be 7 years old this year," Howard answered casually. Now he was more worried about whether Mitchell had heard his previous mumbling. "Although it's a pity, there are still many tasks in the bureau that need him to complete. As an old friend, you have to persuade him more," Keller said. "I will. Goodbye, Keller. There are still important things to deal with in the laboratory." Howard also left here quickly. No one noticed that Director Mitchell Carson, who stayed in the same place, showed a meaningful smile at this moment. For a long time afterwards, SHIELD was not calm. 2 months later, everyone in the meeting room broke up again. Watching Hank slam the door and leave, Director Mitchell Carson, who was sitting at the top, remained silent with an embarrassed look on his face. Alexander Pierce, as the head of the action team, naturally attended the meeting, but at this time he looked at Howard with an embarrassed face. Howard was the head of the scientific research department. Hank Pym was his subordinate before, and as Howard had worked with Hank the longest, he naturally had an unshakable responsibility. "Holland, another S.H.I.E.L.D. member in charge of administrative affairs, said, Howard, the Ant-Man project has been delayed for a long time. I understand. Please give me some more time. I will find time to communicate with Hank." Howard also said annoyedly, "But Holland, if you mention Janet next time, I can't guarantee that you won't be beaten by Hank." There was no way. Although the meeting was deadlocked, everyone was restrained. But after the damn Holland mentioned Janet, Hank slammed the door and went out angrily. At this moment, even Director Mitchell Carson, who was sitting at the top, looked at Holland viciously. Holland knew that he might have messed up again, so he stopped talking. If George saw the people in the conference room, he would definitely laugh out loud, because among the 5 people in the conference room, 3 were Hydra spies. Yes, Holland is also a member of Hydra, so he verbally provoked Hank at the meeting just now. "Okay, let Howard handle Hank's affairs, and let John Garrett take care of those difficult tasks first," Mitchell said directly to Pierce. "Okay, I'll arrange it," Pierce said. Mitchell waved his hand, and Holland and Pierce also stood up and left the meeting room. When only Howard and Director Mitchell Carson were left in the meeting room, Mitchell stood up and walked to Howard. He took out 2 cigars from his arms and handed one to Howard. The two did not speak, cut the cap of the cigar, gently burned the foot of the cigar at 45 degrees, and finally began to swallow it to smoke. Soon, smoke began to fill the area around the two, and Mitchell said, "Howard, can you convince Hank this time?" "I'm not sure, you know, he's too stubborn." Howard leaned back in his chair and shook his head. "Yeah, he's too stubborn. Mitchell said solemnly. Howard, but you know, the Ant-Man project is very important to us. We can't let this just started plan end, so we need him. Yeah, it's a headache for me too. Howard got a headache when he thought of Hank's ugly temper that didn't care about anyone. It would be better if Carter was here at this time. Perhaps only Carter could convince Hank. Howard, can't you study the Pym particles? Mitchell suddenly asked in a low voice. Don't get me wrong, as the director, sometimes I have to make the worst plan. Howard glanced at Mitchell, then shook his head and said, you know, my main research direction is a mechanical field. Without the real object, I can't directly copy this magical particle. Well, I understand. Mitchell heard what Howard meant. That is, if there is a finished product, Howard may be able to copy the Pym particles. By the way, what is Carter busy with recently? I haven't seen her for a long time. Howard asked suddenly. I don't know. It is said that she is carrying out an undercover mission directly ordered by the Security Council. The intelligence from the Soviet Union was passed on by her last time. Because it involves that gentleman, I didn't interfere too much. Mitchell said. Well, I know. I'll try Hank's side again. Howard put the cigar on the ashtray, then got up and left the meeting room. Mitchell looked at the door Howard left and smiled again. This time it was not without gain. Howard was already tempted, wasn't he? A few days later, after Hank's mood calmed down a little, Howard came to Hank's office again and knocked on the door. There was no way that things still needed to be solved. This time Howard brought up Carter and continued to persuade Hank Pym on the condition that Hank helped S.H.I.E.L.D. complete the task and then supported him in conducting quantum experiments. In the end, Hank still lost to reality. Carter's favor was one aspect, and it was also a fact that he needed funds to help him continue to study the quantum field. You know, as one of the most advanced disciplines, the funds required to build a laboratory in the quantum field are not a small amount, and many experimental equipment cannot be bought with money. If he is really stubborn and refuses to carry out the mission, then there may be problems with the extraction of Pym particles. At this time, Hank Pym has not yet established a company and still has a great demand for funds. Well, I can choose to continue to carry out the tasks assigned to me, but you also need to complete the things you promised to support my experiments. Hank said. Of course. Howard said with a smile. There is one more chapter. Please collect, recommend, and vote for it. Chapter 222, Courage. After this incident, Hank also understood the meaning of money and then began to have the idea of starting his own company. In his opinion, if he was a rich man like Howard, he would not compromise this time and could study the quantum field with peace of mind. You know, although Hank Pym's most famous research result is a Pym particle, it does not mean that he has no other achievements, so it is completely fine to just make a few products that want to support a company. But before he could implement it, he was arranged by S.H.I.E.L.D. to go to the Soviet Union to continue a long-term mission. As the new development map of Hydra, the United States naturally does not want any accidents. Now that Carter is lurking in the Soviet Union, and Ant-Man Hank is sent there, at that time, except for Howard Stark who is only interested in researching technology, the Strategic Defense Attack and Logistics Support Agency will become a one-man show for Hydra. At that time, it will be much more convenient to make some small moves. When Hank went to the Soviet Union to continue to investigate the separatist faction, he didn't know that his laboratory was invaded after he boarded the plane to the Soviet Union. Even though Hank's security measures were in place before, and all the successful test products had already been carried by Hank, but relying on the arrangement of S.H.I.E.L.D. itself, how could S.H.I.E.L.D. prevent its own snooping? When a blackout occurred in S.H.I.E.L.D., a tube of semi-finished Pym particles left in the laboratory by Hank Pym was secretly taken out. When Mitchell found Howard with this semi-finished Pym particle, the two had a secret conversation for a long time. Although the specific content is unknown, from the looks of the two, the results should be satisfactory to both parties. Although George saw all this through the surveillance and did not interfere, how could he recruit Hank Pym if he did not leave S.H.I.E.L.D.? Howard was also very excited when he got the Pym particles. Although he coveted the Pym particles before, it was not easy to get them directly. Moreover, Hank Pym attached great importance to the Pym particles and never talked about the technology of Pym particles with others. After trying twice, Howard gave up the idea of getting Pym particles from Hank. Unexpectedly, the sample of Pym particles was delivered to him. Mitchell was right. Pym particles, as such an important thing, must be in the hands of the Strategic Homeland Defense Attack and Logistics Support Agency. But in this case, I need to invest more time. The Pegasus project has made the latest progress. After the new body is designed, it can be tested. By then, although it cannot surpass Stark Corporation, Stark Industries will completely catch up with George's Star Group in top fighters and aerospace, and keep pace with it. It can be said that Howard has never forgotten his dream as a teenager. Holding the semi-finished Pym particles in his hand, Howard decided to hand it over to the laboratory for testing first, and the Pegasus project could also arrange for pilots to be selected. He still worked with the Pegasus laboratory to perfect the most important new aircraft structure first, but in this way, he would have less time to accompany Tony. But Howard believed that Tony, who had been different since childhood, would definitely understand him. On the other side, just as SHIELD fell into a state of calm because Hank was on another mission, George also received a report from StarNet that an alien spaceship was flying towards the wormhole leading to the Earth. There are no other planets with life in this area. If an alien spaceship comes to the solar system through a wormhole, the target must be the Earth, which George can be sure of. However, after George saw the appearance of this alien spaceship, he asked StarNet to lower its guard, including the lunar base, which directly entered the stealth state. Because George recognized that the alien spaceship, which looked like a square with 4 corners folded, was the spaceship of the interstellar sweeper Yondu. Despite this, George still asked StarNet to monitor the movement of the spaceship. After a little inquiry, George came to a hospital in Colorado. Meredith Quill, who had a relationship with Ego of the Celestials, is now in this hospital. Because when Ego, Star-Lord's father, came to visit Star-Lord's mother for the 3rd time last year, he personally placed a tumor in the woman's head. The reason sounds ridiculous, that is, he is afraid that he will fall in love with that woman completely and stay on Earth. George saw a boy wearing a plaid shirt and listening to a Walkman with headphones in the nurse station. The next scene was quite cruel to a child of a few years old. As George expected, the spaceship entered the invisible state after entering the solar system and then flew straight to the Earth. After entering the Earth, the spaceship stopped for a short while and then flew towards this side. Although it is not known how Yondu accurately found Quill's target, the spaceship did appear outside the hospital after a few seconds. George just learned from Red Queen's report that Star-Lord's grandfather was also a member of the Star Group. Unfortunately, Meredith Quill's cancer could not be cured with the medical conditions on the ancient star. Originally, George was not going to intervene in Star-Lord's affairs, but with such a relationship, it was naturally different. After Meredith Quill lost her life, George took her soul. Little Quill ran out of the hospital frantically because he could not accept this reality. Then he slipped and fell in the open space outside the hospital. At this time, Yondu's spaceship removed the stealth and came to the top of Little Quill's head. After shooting a scanning beam to confirm his identity, Little Quill also disappeared into the night with the beam. In this dark night, no one noticed that a little boy disappeared on the Earth. When Little Quill's grandfather found that Little Quill disappeared, Little Quill looked at the aliens who surrounded him in fear. In this era, Xinjiang Films has already launched several alien movies, and Quill, who has been smart since childhood, also understands the situation at this time. "Boss, is this our mission target this time?" asked an alien who looked like a red octopus. "I don't know if it tastes good." The predator with the same appearance as an upright crocodile stretched out his big tongue and turned it around his big mouth and said, "Everyone, step back, don't scare our little god of wealth. We still need to make a lot of money from this kid," Yondu said. Among this group of strange looking aliens, the one with a sky blue bald head and a copper colored fin on top, which is flat, narrow and tall, and pierces into the skin on the top of the skull, looks like an exaggerated mohawk hairstyle on Earth. Except for the blue skin, Yondu, who has the same facial features as humans, is the least scary. Chapter 223 Redemption. Yondu is a very famous predator in the interstellar universe. When he was young, Yondu was imprisoned and enslaved for nearly 20 years as a war slave of the Kree. Later, he regained his freedom after being saved by Lord Starker Rocket, the boss of the current Predator factions, and known as the Starhawk. But now he has left the Starhawk group and is not accepted by other interstellar mercenaries. Because, after Yondu accepted Ego's employment, he broke a rule among all the Predators. Interstellar mercenaries can accept any employment for money, and they will not be looked down upon even if they kill and set fire to people and become interstellar predators at any time. But one of the few iron rules is that cubs cannot be sold, and Yondu broke this rule. Over the years, he helped Ego to bring back countless children. Although the reason was to help Ego reunite with his children, the predators who had been in the universe for many years naturally saw the trick in it. Only Yondu repeatedly deceived himself, paralyzed himself, ignored this rule, and made a deal with Ego. But this time, it was destined to be different. After crossing the wormhole again, the Yondu spaceship hovered there, and everything in the spaceship seemed to be still. This was actually George controlling the entire spaceship when the group of people did not find it, and when the spaceship flew through the wormhole, everyone fell into a deep sleep. There were not many predators in the spaceship. George did not use the mantle to completely cleanse the memories of this group of people, but directly summoned their inner guilt through magic. Then he buried in the depths of their minds the hint that they could not harm Star-Lord, and when necessary, even if they had to sacrifice their own lives, they had to protect Star-Lord, and then everything returned to normal. George also left the power of the power gem in Star-Lord's body, which could save his life one day. Since the celestial gene in Star-Lord's body still needs Ego to activate it, George will not destroy the opportunity that belongs to Star-Lord, and Gamora's line also needs Star-Lord to contact and influence. As for Yondu, perhaps the next 20 years will be a road of redemption for him. Maybe one day he can hear the horn of freedom after his death, and the color of Orwell will bloom on his tombstone. After all, because of him, there are already too many cubs buried on Ego's planet. When George watched the spaceship disappear in the starry sky, he looked around, waited for a moment, and saw that the other party did not want to come out to meet him. George did not force it, and flew back to Earth directly. Because when Yondu's spaceship landed outside the hospital, George felt a vague look looking here. On this planet, the only person who can hide in the dark without being discovered by George knows without thinking that it must be the Ancient One. In fact, George suspected that, even if he did not come to deal with Yondu, the Ancient One would still take action. Because in the original timeline, after receiving Star-Lord, Yondu suddenly felt guilty and did not give Star-Lord to Ego, but let him live on the Predator spacecraft surrounded by villains. This is nonsense. There is no reason to say that thousands of cubs have been sent before, and Star-Lord has felt guilty when it is his turn. Moreover, even if Yondu has felt guilty, it is impossible for all his subordinates to become good people, so there is something unreasonable in it. If we follow the way the predators do things, even if they feel guilty, they can only find a planet to throw the cub away, so how can they still keep it on the ship? So after feeling that look, George figured it out, but because of the relationship with Old Quill, George did not want to let others do it. So he did it himself, and modified the memories of those predators. Washington, Strategic Homeland Defense Attack and Logistics Support Agency, Triskelion Headquarters. Howard Stark has been extremely busy during this period of time, and the Pegasus project has reached its most critical time. The aircraft with the new engine has been finalized and produced, and the pilots have entered the final selection. They are waiting for the final debugging before they can fly. At this time, Carter suddenly came back and appeared at the headquarters. "Hi, Carter, long time no see," Howard greeted with a smile. "Yes, Howard, you don't look very good. How are you doing recently?" Carter asked. "There are a lot of things in the laboratory recently, so you may not have a good rest." Howard rubbed his eyebrows and said, "How about you? Have you completed the task?" "No, it's just a temporary end. I came back to report some work to my husband," Carter said with a smile. "Before coming here, I went to see Tony, and he said that you haven't been back for a long time." "I can't help it. I've been too busy recently." The Pegasus project has reached an important moment, and there are new projects in the laboratory, so. Howard said with a wry smile. What project can make you devote so much energy? Carter asked curiously. This. Howard said with difficulty. Okay, I understand. I won't ask any more questions. But no matter how busy you are, you still need to take care of your family. They are the most important. Carter said with a smile. Because of Howard, Carter and his wife Mariah have a very good relationship. She almost became Tony's godmother. So naturally, he hopes that his offspring can have a happy childhood. I understand. After these few days, I will take time to spend more time with him. Howard agreed and suddenly asked, by the way, has Carter seen Hank recently? No. What's wrong? Carter asked. No, he just went to Russia to perform a mission, so I asked casually. Howard suddenly changed his words. Howard, the new project you mentioned is not related to Hank's Pine particles, right? Carter asked. As a senior agent, Carter couldn't be unaware of his colleagues who had worked with him for decades, so when he saw Howard suddenly mention Hank, Carter understood what might have happened. Howard, you should understand the significance of Pine particles to Hank, so I advise you not to hit it. Carter said seriously. Of course, I understand. Howard said with a smile. Seeing that Howard's answer was also very serious, although he still had doubts in his heart, he did not continue to ask. Half a month later, in the Triskelion, in the conference room, Carter was discussing the expansion plan of S.H.I.E.L.D. with Howard and Holland when Hank walked in angrily. It turned out that Hank had not met Carter during his mission in Moscow. After knowing that Carter appeared this time, he wanted to come back to communicate with Carter to see if he could get more clues. Hank never thought that, after returning to S.H.I.E.L.D. this time, what awaited him was another beginning that he didn't want to see. There is one more chapter. Please recommend, collect, and vote for me. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 224, Parting on Bad Terms. When Hank returned to SHIELD, he saw a piece of paper with the words Harvard Defense Laboratory on his desk. Although Hank didn't know who gave this information and what his purpose was, after a little thought, he decided to go and take a look. Then he found that there were experimenters in Howard's defense laboratory trying to copy his Pine particles and battlesuit. Feeling deceived, he picked up a failed Pine particle reagent and went to the conference room. Of course, the note was put there by George, and at this moment he was sitting in his office on the top floor of the building, watching the surveillance footage broadcast by Wiki. As soon as Hank entered the conference room, he saw Carter, Howard, and Holland chatting, and then he shouted, "Stark. He doesn't seem very happy." Holland saw Hank coming in and immediately said to Howard, "Hello, Hank." Howard ignored Holland and stood up to greet Hank. "You should be in Moscow. I took a detour." Hank took out a small bottle of red reagent from his pocket and slammed it on the table, then continued, "I went to your defense laboratory." Carter, who was standing aside, saw the reagent that Pine took out, and his face changed drastically. He looked at Howard and said, "Tell me, this is not what I thought it was." Before Howard answered, Hank next to him said, "That depends on whether you think this is a failed product intended to replicate my experimental results." Seeing that Carter obviously didn't know about this, Hank glanced at Holland and Howard and said, "Even for the two of you, this is too bold. You were ordered to go to Russia. I need to remind you, Dr. Pine, you are a soldier." Holland said at this moment, trying to change the subject, "I'm a scientist." Hank looked at Holland and said, "For a scientist, his experimental results are like his children and his glory, and no one is allowed to tarnish them. Then act like a scientist. Pine particles are the most revolutionary scientific invention since ancient times. Help us make the best use of them." Howard suddenly said. Maybe Hank was the one who had misjudged Howard. He should not cherish such excellent experimental results. He should contribute them to everyone. It is very interesting to think about this argument. In Howard's view, His own research and development belong to private property and are sacred and inviolable, while other people's inventions should be taken out and made full use of. This kind of robber-like business thinking is exactly why George doesn't like Howard. I asked you to use me like a servant, but now you are trying to steal my research, Hank said angrily. Holland once again didn't control his mouth and suddenly stimulated Hank and said, if you had protected Janet as fiercely as you are now, Dr. Pym. Even Howard, who was standing aside, showed a helpless expression and shook his head after hearing Holland's words. Hank looked at this indifferent supervisor, shook his head expressionlessly, and rested his hands on the table. Finally, he couldn't help it, so he pulled the other's head and pressed it hard on the table, making a bang sound. Suddenly, Holland screamed ah. Just when Hank wanted to continue beating Holland, Carter immediately stopped him from behind. Don't be impulsive, Hank, Carter said. You know, no matter how legitimate Hank's original reasons were, in S.H.I.E.L.D., directly attacking a supervisor level person will not have a good result once it is taken seriously. Holland raised his head, wiped the blood from his nose with his hand, and looked at Hank with fear. Hank pointed at Holland and warned, if you dare to mention my wife again, I will let you see what fierceness is. Holland, who was warned, was just a civilian supervisor sitting in the office. He didn't dare to say anything harsh to Hank, who looked fierce at the moment, so he looked at Howard on the side, hoping to get his help. Howard looked at Holland, who looked embarrassed, and then shook his head and said, don't look at me. You said it yourself, and I warned you. Holland lowered his head to wipe the blood from his nose, and didn't dare to look at Hank Pym again. Hank no longer targeted Holland, but looked at Howard and said seriously, I'm resigning. Howard was the head of Hank's research department. Although Hank joined the Ant-Man project, he was actually under Howard's management. So now he only needed to resign to Howard. We refuse to accept it, officially, Hank. We need you. The Pym particles are a miracle, please. Howard tried to retain him at this moment. Don't let your past determine the future. You know, if Hank officially quits S.H.I.E.L.D., then they will definitely not be able to hide the fact that they have been peeping at other people's research results, which is not a glorious thing. Moreover, Howard really wants to get the Pym particles. As he said, the Pym particles are too magical. It was fine when Hank was still a member of S.H.I.E.L.D., but once he left S.H.I.E.L.D. would no longer be able to continue researching Pym particles. Otherwise the results would be uncontrollable. And through the experiments over the past 6 months, Howard also found that Pym particles were too mysterious. Even if he invested more time, Howard had no confidence that he could replicate them. But this time, they had touched the bottom line of a scientist, so Hank looked at Howard and said seriously, as long as I'm alive, no one can get that formula. Then he glanced at Carter and left the meeting room without looking back. After Hank left the room, Holland spoke again. We shouldn't have let him leave this building. Carter was not familiar with Holland, and he looked down on their behavior of predatory behavior, so he directly retorted, you've already cheated him, and now you want to go to war with him? Yes. Holland also showed a tough attitude at this moment. A female agent who was not away from the headquarters all year round, even if she was one of the founders, was not worth his taboo. Our scientists are still a long way from replicating his results. Howard couldn't stand it anymore and said to Holland, he just taught you a lesson. Do you really want to experience how powerful he is when you can't even see where he is? Glancing at the direction Hank left, Howard continued, I've known Hank Pym for a long time. He is not a security risk unless we force him to that point. Howard's words also reminded Holland that Hank at the moment was not someone he could provoke. Once Hank transformed into Ant-Man, they had no means to subdue Hank. After listening to Howard's words, Holland temporarily accepted this reality, but from his greedy eyes, he did not intend to give up the research on Pym particles so easily. Chapter 225 Recruiting Hank. Washington, Triskelion Building, Parking Lot. Just as Hank Pym, the first generation of Ant-Man, was walking towards his car with a storage box in his arms, the roar of a sports car sounded behind him. Hank turned around and saw a silver sci-fi sports car appear at the end of the parking lot. A few seconds later, the car stopped steadily beside him. It was Mr. Swinton's car. Hank recognized it at a glance. This car was really too special. There was only one in the world so far. The door near Hank opened directly, and Hank saw a handsome man in the driver's seat, who was about the same age as him looking at him. "Drive Hank Pym, do you have time to chat?" George said with a smile. Hank looked at the storage box in his hand, smiled bitterly, and then said, "Of course." After Hank put the storage box in his car, he got into George's car. Sitting in the special seat, looking at the sci-fi center console, feeling the pushback brought by the sports car, Hank looked at the man in the driver's seat strangely. There is no way. According to the records in the data, Mr. Swinton, who is 80 years old, is definitely an old man, but it is hard to imagine that an old man likes such a fashionable car. "Why, do you find me strange?" George also saw Hank's eyes, so he asked. No, I just wondered what you wanted to ask me about." Hank certainly would not say what was in his mind, but directly threw out the thing he wanted to ask the most. "What are you going to do next?" George asked. "Well, do you know what happened today?" Hank asked. I asked someone to put that note," George said directly. "Oh, so, then thank you for your reminder, Mr. Minister. I didn't expect Howard and his team to do so excessively," Hank said. "Well, as the Security Council with supervisory responsibility for the Strategic Defense Attack and Logistics Support Agency, the meaning of our existence is to correct the healthy and orderly operation of this department. Obviously, what they did this time was not in accordance with the rules, so the matter is not over here. We have all the evidence, and will punish those who participated in this matter," George said. "Thank you, Mr. Minister," Hank said. Although Hank no longer cares about these things, he is still grateful to George for upholding justice for him. "So what are Dr. Pym's plans next?" George asked again. "Well, I plan to set up a company myself. After I have some savings, I can focus on my research," Hank said. "Not bad, a good idea," George nodded and said, "but before that, are you interested in joining my company?" "Join your company?" Hank asked. "Yes, join my company, I can fulfill your dream," George said while driving. "My dream?" Hank thought of his wife who was trapped in the quantum field, smiled and shook his head. "No one can help me complete it." George glanced at Hank and just said, "Look further, you will find more." Then the next second, Hank saw a scene that he was very familiar with and saw that all the objects outside the window of the sports car were rapidly enlarged. This scene often appeared when he was wearing the Ant-Man suit, which means that the sports car he was sitting in became smaller. Hank looked at George and suddenly didn't know what to say. Hank was very angry that Howard had just been accused of stealing his experimental results, but now his car was using his Pym particle technology. Although Howard and his gang wanted to copy his experimental results, Hank thought it was still a long way off. But now it was obvious that the other party had already mastered the mature Pym particle technology and mastered the special formula he discovered. "Do you think you are the only one who has mastered this method?" George asked directly without waiting for Hank to react, and then the sports car returned to its original state after turning the corner. "Isn't it?" Hank looked at George with an ugly face. Then George let go of the steering wheel of the sports car in Hank's right-hand eyes. Then he took out a bottle of mineral water from the storage box next to him. In his unbelievable eyes, this ordinary bottle of mineral water shrank in front of him. George put the shrunken mineral water into Hank's hand, and then the bottle of mineral water returned to its original state in his hand. Hank looked at the ordinary mineral water bottle in his hand, unscrewed the bottle cap, and observed that there was nothing unusual about the bottle cap, and drank the mineral water in the bottle himself. "Why is this?" Hank was so shocked that he couldn't speak. This moment completely shocked Hank. If the car's shrinkage could be explained by Pym particles, he suspected that the other party had stolen his experimental results when he didn't know. But this bottle of mineral water couldn't be explained because he had tested it and it was just an ordinary bottle of mineral water. "Very interesting, isn't it?" George patted Hank on the shoulder and said with a smile. "Minister, what's going on?" Hank asked directly. At this time, Hank understood that George was definitely not using Pym particle technology, and since the other party invited him to join the company and demonstrated the same method as Pym particles, it means that the other party is not afraid of him knowing the reason. Sure enough, Hank heard George explain, Pym particles are very magical. They can change the distance between substances, making people or objects larger or smaller. However, there are two other situations where this control can be achieved directly without using time particles. George explained with a smile. In addition, too, this sentence directly confused Hank. Because, when Hank still thought that the time particles he discovered were so amazing, someone told him that there were already more ways to do it. So what was the point of the time particles he spent so much effort to study? If you are interested, I can tell you the other two ways. George glanced at Hank and said. Hearing George say that he could tell him the other two ways, Hank came back to his senses again. Then he asked, "Are you willing to tell me the other two ways?" George smiled and nodded and said, "Actually, it doesn't matter if I tell you. To me, those are nothing. Minister, I agree to join your company." Hank said immediately. "It doesn't matter, just treat it as a casual chat between us. As for your joining the company, you can think about it carefully before answering me." George waved his hand and said, "The first method is the one I used just now. This method is not suitable for everyone. At present, few people can do it." George explained while taking out another bottle of mineral water and letting it change in his hands. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.